Hello, hello, hello. Hello and welcome. I'm trying to balance the mask for safety and the mic. It's a hard journey, so thank you for bearing with me. So hello and welcome to the Summit on Police Culture. My name is Angela DiFilippo. My pronouns are she, her, and I've been working with Juan and Unidos since 2016. I will also be your MC today. Thank you all for being here. Our goal in hosting events like these is to facilitate sustainable change so every member of every community can feel and truly be safe. We cannot create this change without you. We also can't create that change without the help of co-sponsors. Is it easier if I just yell really loud? I think the mic is kind of... I have to use the mic? Okay, sorry, Andrew, thank you. We also can't create that change without the help of co-sponsors, so we'd like to take a moment to give a special thanks to the Gipson Center for letting us use their facilities, and to the ACLU, the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, the NAACP, and the Washington Alliance for Gun Responsibility. Thank you, yes. Now we have a full day planned with panels, experts, and of course, lunch. To get us started with the summit, I would like to invite Reverend Paul Benz, former co-director of the Faith Action Network, president of Partners for Social Change, and lobbyist for the Washington Coalition for Police Accountability, to the stage for our land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Angela. As we know, it's very important to begin every gathering that we have to acknowledge our indigenous sisters and brothers in whose land that we are upon. So we want to acknowledge this morning, of course, the Tulalip tribes and the many tribes that are within that tribe. It would be errant for me if I did not acknowledge also the Snohomish Treaty Tribe, the Snohomish. Obviously, we know which county we're in. If you are from another county, this is Snohomish County, named after that tribe. There's the river, and we know how important we should acknowledge the importance of the waters and the seas and the rivers, the arteries of Mother Earth, that are so important to not only our indigenous sisters and brothers, but also to us. I want to acknowledge, along with mentioning the Snohomish tribe, that had many years-long effort to become a federally recognized tribe and was denied by a federal judge. I believe Patricia Seamonster is here. Is Patricia here in our midst? She was. Oh, there's. Thank you. Let's raise our hands to you and to her sister Jennifer Bearskin, who is here also in our midst. I want to acknowledge also, I would be remiss if to take another minute or two to acknowledge how this land was, quote, acquired in terms of the fraudulent and racist treaty system that was established by, I'll acknowledge who I am, a white man, and by our territorial governor, Isaac Stevens, and his team, that put before treaties that could not be read or understood, and if they were disagreed with, we know what happened to one of the chiefs, the great Nisqually chief, who had just some simple pleas, that's a P-L-E-A-S, to the territorial governor about the confinement that they were being put on. And Isaac Stevens, we should acknowledge, whose photo hangs in the governor's office, we should acknowledge it was his personal vendetta, because Isaac Stevens wanted to be, he had other colleagues in Congress that totally disagreed with his approach of having Chief Leshai hung in Steilacoom, Washington. We need to acknowledge the truth of all of this and so much more. I want to end on a positive note that you and I gathered here need to continue our intentionality to be better allies with our Native Indigenous sisters and brothers regarding the critical issues before them. I see our law enforcement here this morning and the good efforts going on, and I see our elected officials in terms of the MMIW/M, the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Men legislative bill that went on in terms of our state and now is being implemented. Thank you for those elected officials here that supported that and were leaders in that effort, and at the congressional level as well. Thank you for our Indigenous brothers and sisters. We look forward to the continuation of our time together here today, and I'll welcome to the stage Juan Perales, Unidos president.
I don't know if it's just me, but I feel really warm. Good morning, amigas and amigos. Before I begin my welcome speech, I want to recognize everyone that helped organize the summit. I will begin with the ladies first. Secretary of Unidos, Angela DiFilippo, who is also our MC. Okay. We have Marilyn Chase, Senator Marilyn Chase, human rights activist Jennifer Bearskin, Elizabeth Lunsford, Karen Chase from the Edmond School District, board member, and our Reverend, of course you already heard from him, Paul Benz. I also want to thank in advance all the people serving us lunch today. You might wonder why the white roses are on stage. White roses symbolize purity, loyalty, and love, okay? I will read a short poem by Jose Marti, Cuban nationalist poet and philosopher. I have a white rose to tend, in July as in January. I give it to a true friend who offers his frank hand to me, and for cruel ones whose blows break the heart of which I live. Thistle nor thorn do I give, for him I also have a white rose. I welcome you with open arms, with love, a lot of love, because love is what is going to keep us all working together and treating each other with dignity and respect. It takes love for a village of marginalized, exploited, and at times targeted communities to come together with law enforcement, legislators, to begin ongoing dialogue we all agree must be done to change current police culture into a culture that truly serves and protects all communities regardless of class or color. Failure to situate police culture within the political and social context of policing has resulted in the need for rule tightening or changing the culture. It is futile to guess whether rule tightening or changing the culture will be effective at the level of individual racism. However, patterns are discernible in aggregate culture and turn into structure, and structural change has an impact. We must bring the theorization of policing into touch with contemporary theory and the present reality of policing. Three challenges we must address today are very clear: transparency, accountability, and legislation that builds trust in policing. I agree that the goal of the summit is to form a partnership of law enforcement agencies, community police, accountability organizations, and elected officials to start the ongoing dialogue. I agreed to examine certain legislative priorities for our next session. Lastly, I want to hear that we must embrace the idea of socially radical creation of a partnership of law enforcement officers, community advocates for police accountability, and the members of the state Senate Law and Justice and House Community Safety Justice Reentry Committees. This must be a priority if we are serious about changing a culture of policing that is stale, has never worked. Transparency, accountability, building trust, humanism, and compassion in policing is severely needed. Again, thank you for being here to support a partnership that can begin an ongoing dialogue. to change the culture of police and for the safety and benefit of all. I ask for all to consider engaging your respective legislators and urge them to support much needed legislation on changing police culture. You can also reach out to me, to Unidos, for information on legislation that is being considered in Olympia this coming legislative session. Gracias to everyone for being here. Thank you again. Oh, okay. I forgot. So now I have the honor of introducing Senator Manka Dhingra, who, as you know, is running for the Attorney General position. Unidos endorsed her because we believe she will do all she can to make Washington a safe state for everyone. So please welcome Manka Dhingra.
Good morning, everyone. Can you guys hear me okay? I know this mic comes out a little muffled. It is such a pleasure for me to be here with all of you today. Thank you so much for showing up. My name is Manka Dhingra. I am the Deputy Majority Leader of the Washington State Senate. I chair the Law and Justice Committee. I sit on Healthcare and Ways and Means and represent the 45th Legislative District, and I'm proud to be running to be the next Attorney General of Washington. I have also been a Senior Deputy Prosecuting Attorney with King County and actually helped write the first federal grant for co-responder funding in our state. Having been a prosecutor for nearly 20 years, we all know that the work that the first responders amongst us do has changed dramatically over the years. More and more is asked of them, and not just to protect us and solve crime, but to also do the work of public health, respond to mental health crisis, respond to addiction, and to be the solution for homelessness. They're called as a last resort because they have no choice but to respond. People know that when 911 is dialed, someone will have to act. But conversations on how to show up, de-escalate, intervene, and help are constantly changing and evolving. We're making an effort to treat people with more compassion and understanding and save lives. In my role as a Senior Deputy Prosecuting Attorney, I was involved at the very beginning of the development of the 40-hour crisis intervention training. I was an instructor at the Criminal Justice Training Commission and presented every month for 10 years before I decided to run for office. I knew every month that after that week-long class, I would get calls from officers in that class. Most would want to staff difficult cases and just chat. But quite often, I would get a call from an officer telling me about what happened the week after, that they were able to put into effect the de-escalation techniques they learned, and they shared their stories. There's one story that has stayed with me for a very long time. I once got a call from an officer who described in detail how he was able to get a knife away from a man who was standing in front of an elementary school just as the school was about to let out. This officer's voice was shaking while he was telling me his experience because he had come so close to using his gun. He knew that the children would be coming out any minute, and he knew he had to de-escalate the situation. The situation ended exactly the way we all hoped that it would. But no one finds out about these scenarios because they are successful scenarios. The media does not cover it, the community does not give everyone kudos, but we know what works. We need guardians of our communities and not warriors in our street. As a state senator, I have been honored to lead the work of police accountability and criminal justice reform in our state. To quote one of my favorite superheroes, Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And we as a state as a country, have given law enforcement the power to carry a gun, the power to take a life. And with that power, we need the responsibility and the accountability. And this is not easy work. We all have to recognize that this is not easy work. But we need to recruit people who respect the community, who believe in building trust, who believe in being guardians. And we need training that is consistent with the values we expect from our law enforcement officers. As someone who has been married for 28 years, I can tell you that relationships are a two-way street. To build community, members, leaders, we have a responsibility as well. We have to be good partners. We have to be focused on saving lives of everyone, about working together in partnership to reduce violence, build trust, and have accountability. I have been cultivating that relationship with law enforcement and community for decades. As Attorney General, as a lawyer for the people of Washington, it is critical to me that we have a culture where there's mutual respect, where there is trust that people are showing up with the intent to learn, with the intent to help, and have the training and resources to do their jobs well. As Attorney General, that is what I will be working towards. Part of this job is also about having a robust 988 system so that we have a place to call for behavioral health crisis that is not 911. Someone to come that has expertise in addressing behavioral health issues, and a place to go that is not our jail or emergency rooms. The innovation and creativity I have seen firsthand all across the state of Washington has been impressive. Embedded social workers, mobile crisis units, crisis intervention teams, treatment alternatives to incarceration, and the list goes on and on. We need non-violent resolutions, and the more that we build systems to strengthen the connections between first responders and the community, the more likely those crises will end peacefully. I'm honored to have received a national award from Mental Health America for Washington's 988 crisis system. And while that award has my name on it, I received it because of all the work that all of you have been doing for years in improving Washington's crisis response system. And this is the work we have to continue. I want to end with a story of something that happened just Sunday last week. I was actually at the airport waiting for my oldest daughter to pick me up, and she was, of course, running late, as children often do. And there was a police officer standing, not too far away from me, dealing with an unoccupied vehicle. And down a couple of ways out was an irate passenger who was just yelling at the police officer. And the police officer ignored him because he was attending to an unattended vehicle. And then after a few minutes, I see this man walking towards the law enforcement officer, just continuing to yell and be angry. I saw the interaction between the two of them, and after 10 minutes, that man, who was now calm, thanked the officer and shook his hand. And so after the encounter, I looked at the officer and I said, "Nicely done, officer." He looked at me and he goes, "Are you the one who trained him in crisis intervention in 2015? And I go, "Probably." And we had a wonderful conversation about his work and the training that he received. And the next day, he actually sends me an email. He didn't have to send me an email or follow up, but I was really touched receiving it. And I want to read the email he sent. He said, "I was a Port of Seattle police officer who you talked with out on Airport Drive. I just wanted to say it was great to see you again. Your training back in 2015 at CIT has helped tremendously with my policing skills to this day, and as you saw, your training helped today with the angry passenger. Thank you for the work you're doing in the legislature, and I wish you lots of luck in your race to be Attorney General. You would be a good representative for the people and a good bridge with police relations as well." So thank you to each and every one of you for being here and helping build that bridge based on mutual respect and trust, and it is my honor and privilege to do this work with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, let's give another round of applause for Juan Perales and Senator Dinga. Also, quick apologies if it's a little hard of hearing with the mic. We're working around it, right? All about adaptability. So thank you for your grace. Now, I would like to introduce our first panel and welcome them to the stage. We have 4 individuals who have lost loved ones to police violence, and they have agreed to come here and kind of share their experience. And I want to thank all the members of this panel in advance for sharing your experiences and honoring us with your stories. I would also like to apologize to the general public. We got some corrections kind of late in the day, so there are a few errors on that agenda, so apologies for that. Now, please join me in welcoming our first panel. We have Tanya Isabel, making her way up, and her cousin, Charlena Lyles, was killed by Seattle police in 2017. We also have Katrina Johnson. She is also a cousin of Charlena Lyles, and as well as the executive director of the Seattle King County chapter of Black Lives Matter. We also have Monet Washington. She is the sister of Manny Ellis, who was killed by 3 Tacoma police officers in March of 2020. And we have Po Lipe. His cousin, Lucia Faltogo, was killed by Seattle police on New Year's Eve 2018. Po will be joining us virtually. So please join me in welcoming our panel to the stage. Thank you again. I'm going to pass you all the mic, and the floor is yours to introduce yourselves and share your experiences. Thank you. And whoever wants to go first can.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tanya Isabel. I am an impacted family member. My cousin Charlena Lyles was killed by Seattle police in 2018. I'm just here to fight for justice for impacted families to protect their loved ones in the act of death.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Katrina Johnson, impacted family member, cousin of Charlena Lyles, one of the spokespersons for my family. I'm here today to just share experiences and things since joining this family that nobody wants to be a part of when their loved one is killed by law enforcement, and not just sitting there in that pain, but turning it into purpose, not only for Charlena's legacy, but until culture changes, there are going to be other families ushered into this family that no one wants to be a part of. And to be angry is not enough. What are you gonna do to bring about change, right? What are you gonna do so that we can combat some of the systemic things that are happening in Washington state specifically? And so I'll turn it over to Monet.
Hi, my name's Monet Washington. My brother, Manuel Ellis, was murdered by 3 Tacoma police officers on March 3rd of 2020 while he was walking back home from getting a snack. Sorry, it's been a little bit hard for me, especially during this week. Nobody really listened to me when my brother was murdered. It was also at the very beginning of COVID and the pandemic, so people were very scattered, just trying to survive and figure other things out. But the police, they didn't investigate. They did no investigation at all. I during the pandemic, got fired from my job, and when I have nothing to do, I find odd things to do, and during that time, it was to find out what happened to my brother. It wasn't until another concerned citizen that heard me at a protest reached out to me via Facebook and connected me with someone who actually had video footage and who was there the night that my brother was murdered. I was very, very, very persistent, not only with our local officials in Tacoma, but also with our governor, his staff. I wouldn't leave him alone, didn't stop, until they actually did something, investigated properly, which I'm still a little biased with that. There was a trial for my brother that ended in December of 2023 with a not guilty verdict for all of the 3 officers that murdered my brother. It was very, very hard. That's probably the hardest thing that I've ever done in my life, was to, or even had to witness, was to sit there every day in court, hearing my mom cry, asking her why, or she's asking why. I'm a mother myself, and that's probably like the worst thing I believe a parent should ever have to do, is to bury their own child and then see their deceased child's body on a slab in open court, and watching and hearing the officers' family members laugh, suck their teeth, make comments, and the judge as well laugh about it. Even now, my brother did not, that wasn't a fair trial. They put my brother on trial, and it was clear from day one. I'm not gonna stop until there's justice for my brother. And I'm not gonna stop until there's change, because I have 7 children, 6 of which are boys. So I have 6 young Black boys and a Black husband. And I can't have that happen to anyone else that I know. It needs to stop.
I was going to say, do we have Poe online? Not yet. We are still waiting on that. Can you move those flowers so we can see their faces? Sure. Yeah, the middle one or all of them? All of them. Great. Yeah, we can. We can do that.
Okay.
My husband has Poe's number. I'm just gonna call him. He was just talking.
I wanted to state that shortly after Charlena was killed, there was a group called Not This Time that was talking about an initiative that they were going to do called I-940. And that group, along with many other folks and coalitions, came together, and my cousin and I were on the front lines of that at the height of her just being murdered, fighting for I-940, which allowed a trial. Once we got that passed, it allowed an officer to actually stand trial, because we were able to change the law. Had that not happened, there wouldn't have been a trial for Manny Ellis, and no, it didn't go the way we wanted it to go. And so what we saw when that verdict came out on Thursday was the second person post 940 to be tried for murdering a person in community by the name of Jesse Saray. We were on the front lines fighting for a bill that would never serve our family, but in the future, we were hoping it would bring justice to another family. So paying homage to those impacted families and those folks that stood on the front lines and were in the trenches fighting for something that was never going to serve them. And even though it didn't work for your brother, Monet, I'm grateful that a family got justice, because when one of us win, all of us win, and we hold each other even in those tough times when things don't go our way, because we're bonded together by life. And those are just some of the things, but even within that, the work that I've done with Mr. Shrimpshire, serving on the task force that the governor put together after your brother was murdered, you know, so working together with law enforcement. And no, we don't always agree. We don't always see eye to eye. But if we're not even willing to come to the table, how are we going to get anywhere? And so that's how I attack the work that I'm doing. There's always been a mutual respect and relationship that I've had with some law enforcement officers, and I do not believe that it's just one bad apple. I think it goes deeper than that. It goes to the root cause. I think that rank and file officers are not just out there going rogue. I think that there is a complete culture of policing that needs to change. And I think that more communities need to come to the table, because if we don't, people are going to continue to be killed. No one is shedding a light on what's happening in Spokane. There has been 5 community members killed by law enforcement, shot in the back, and no one's talking about it. Spokane County is number 2 in the nation in police homicide right now. No one's talking about it. There is no colorism amongst impacted families. It doesn't matter whether they're white, whether they're black, or indigenous, or anything else like that. There's still people being killed by law enforcement without accountability about any answers for those families, and that has to stop. What is going on in Spokane County?
And I would just like to say, we're here today because we believe in being a voice for our communities. We have to step up as people to talk and communicate with law enforcement, to let them know we're all human, and our goal is to see that everyone makes it home safely. It's not just about our loved ones, it's about the loss of life. And we just want to be here to be open communication, that we are here. And we are here to be a voice for the community, for the ones that's lost, for the ones that's having mental issues, that there's a different way to de-escalate than to take a life. So the format is open for any questions at this time.
I just wanted to add another thing. So like Katrina had said about I-940, my experience with I-940 was that, and I'm not going to speak for all counties, but I'll just speak for within Pierce County. I-940 was not implemented. They had done nothing, literally. They did not create a place to, or a task force to have an independent investigation. They actually did the opposite. There were emails, which wasn't allowed in the trial, but with Ramsdell, who was the chief of police for Tacoma at the time, and Pastor, who was the sheriff for Pierce County, and they had emails between each other saying, we can just investigate each other, so that way we just have each other's backs. They had a Pierce County sheriff on top of my brother, as well as other Tacoma police officers that didn't get charged. So when it comes to I-940, yes, that was there, and it was supposed to be designed to make it easier to prosecute. But up until May of 2021, I was being told, even by the AG's office, we still don't know if we're going to prosecute. We don't know if we can. They had no clue what they were doing. So yes, that was implemented and put there, but again, there's no oversight. Even right now, since I think 2012, the FBI was supposed to, not the FBI, I should say, but law enforcement agencies in the state, in each state in America, were supposed to collect data on officer-involved deaths and custody deaths, because that's a big issue here, not only here in Washington, but everywhere, but specifically in custody deaths with inmates. The way that my brother was murdered is often how a lot of inmates die. And then the DOJ has to investigate those, which they do a lot. And even before Jesse Saray and Officer Nelson getting charged and put in jail, there was another officer in Spokane that brutally murdered a young man by the name of Otto Zim. The Spokane Fire Department was doing all types of corrupt things. Their police department was doing all types of corrupt things. They were not able to charge that officer. It took for the Department of Justice to come in and get him charged for violating that man's civil rights. And also, like Katrina said, when it comes to police brutality and officers, killing other people, their ability to have access to the most vulnerable people in this society is extremely dangerous. I do a lot of volunteer work with our houseless folks, and I talk to them, and the type of things that they tell me officers do to them, dehumanizing them, putting spit hoods on them, beating them, going into their camps, acting aggressive towards them for no reason. They're not safe either. But also, I do know from my own experience in being in that courtroom for my brother, had my brother not have been a black man, I do not think that he would have been looked at how he was being looked at in that courtroom. It was very racist. And Pierce County has a racist history. Washington State has a racist history. And we're going to need to address those issues before we can do anything. We have to acknowledge the problem and the root of the problem. Policing came from slave patrol. Last time I checked, the only people in this country that aren't naturally from here that were enslaved was black people. And like you said, there's a culture issue. Even when there is black cops, a lot of them, they're not gonna say anything. They're there for their check. Some of them want to feel accepted by those other cops. But
And how are they going to be protected if they do say something?
they're not. So then I met one police officer who she stayed with Tacoma Police Department and retired. And after she retired, she let everything go. She let it all out. And she was a black woman. We have to get rid of this And I don't know how, but this racist society that we still currently live in, if that's not gonna go anywhere, I don't know how we're supposed to stop people in general from being killed and murdered by the police, not only by the police, but in our healthcare system, people of color, women, Black women, are disproportionately being killed at a higher rate in healthcare. Our children in school being disproportionately suspended for no reason a lot of the times, and yet their same counterparts may do the same thing and they get harsher punishment, no punishment. We have to fix this racist issue in this country, and if we're not gonna fix it, I don't see how anything else is supposed to get done. I don't know if they got a hold of Poe yet, but that was my piece. Any questions? Any questions?
Let's first see if we can get Poe on. I saw that they were able to make it into the room.
Did you get Poe? Yeah? Is he on right now? Oh, okay. Hi, Poe.
Hi, brother.
Can you unmute?
To get us started, actually, so many of us know the names and the stories of the beloved family members that you all have lost. How would you like others to share your story in support of you and your families?
Share our stories based on the work that we do.
Yeah, yeah.
Within the community. Yes. Well, when you think of our cousin Charlene Laus, our legacy is to change the culture of how policing is done and how they view us as humans and not just, people that they want to kill. We're here to represent that we are human. We have lives and our loved ones have a life. So when you talk about us, talk about the work that we do in the community. We're here about making change.
I would say the best way to honor my cousin and her legacy is to, one, not tokenize us, hijack our stories, share our stories without asking us if it's okay. We are not victims. We are victorious in our relentless effort to get justice for our loved ones. We are the experts of our experience, so to have something without us being involved it doesn't work. We don't want to be talked about. We want to be at the table, and we want to know what's happening. So anytime you have law enforcement somewhere, we should be there too, because we have an experience and they have an experience. They're the experts of policing. We're the experts of what we've lost due to them, and the only way our community is going to come together as a whole is with everybody at the table making meaningful changes. Yes, we have non-negotiables. Yes, they have non-negotiables. We may not see eye to eye, but if we don't at least get in the room with them, we can't even begin to have a conversation, right?
I think one thing that I really, 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 really want for the way that I want my brother to be honored is I feel like during the trial and everything, not only do I feel like a lot of the trolls and the mean people online, you know, oh, he was a drug addict, he deserved it. He was a junkie, he had it coming. Or the classic thing that they say, well, if you do what the police say, you know, they're not going to kill you. Changing those people's minds is hard, but just when you share my brother's story, he was a young, talented man. He was a loving man, a loving father, a loving uncle, the best big brother, an amazing son, who dealt with mental health the way he dealt with it. Life is hard. And my brother tried very hard. I watched him. It takes a lot, especially within our community, for Black men to go to a therapist and seek help. Go to a doctor and ask, you know, hey, this is my diagnosis. I'm understanding now, I need to be medicated. What are my options? That's who my brother was. And I do agree with you. Don't hijack our family stories and try and take off and do things, because it's not going to work. And quite frankly, it's disrespectful, because you're using their names and their legacy as a moment for you to do whatever it is you're wanting to do or get a certain agenda pushed. Especially, I've even seen it with politicians who have never even mention my brother's name, Charlena's name, Jesse's name, Saeed's name, Benny's name, Sean's name. They never talked about them. And then a verdict comes out and they send out a newsletter. They're trying to secure votes. Don't use us for that. It's disrespectful. And as a voter, when you do see that, honestly, you should be questioning legislators, senators that are doing that, because their motivation is not there. They want that vote, and that's it. And I mean, one thing that I know I did in Pierce County was I got a mural put up of my brother, and that's Pierce County's constant reminder of who my brother really was. Seeing his beautiful smile on that, it's not even a building anymore, but just seeing that, it's like a piece of Hilltop, it's a piece of Tacoma, and it's not ever gonna go anywhere. So, yeah.
Poe, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, we cannot hear you still.
Oh, no.
We're gonna work on the volume.
Okay, all right. Sounds
we're sorry about all these little technical issues. We appreciate you being here, my friend. Thank you.
Okay.
Huh? Huh? Can you see?
Mic check, mic check.
Hey!
Mic check. Are we on?
We can hear you, my friend. Hooray!
All right. All right. Will you let me know how much time I have? I just had a little piece to share that's on my heart.
Yeah, you've got the floor, my friend. Please feel free to share your experience and your name and your background and all the good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, my sister. Appreciate it. Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Leapai. I am impacted family member as well. My cousin Yosia Falatomo's life was taken at the hands of Seattle police on New Year's Eve 2018. The officer's name was Officer Jared Keller. My cousin was one of 3 people killed by this same officer since the officer joined the force. For my family community, we think that's problematic, and we think everyone should agree with that. You know, my cousin, when he was taken, left behind 2 boys under the age of 10 that my family has taken on taking care of and raising. And I'm glad we're here talking about culture. I am very big on culture, and I'm glad we're diving into it, because when I think about culture, I think about my own culture. I think about Polynesian, Pacific Island, and Samoan culture. And for transparency, I am a chief in Samoa now. And one of the ways, and I don't mean this in a boastful way, but I believe one of the ways I acquired that position as a chief is because of how much I've embraced and engaged in my culture. Let me tell you all a little bit about my Polynesian culture. We are happy people. We love all people. If we're barbecuing and someone's walking by the street, by our house, we're going to invite you to come eat and grab a plate. If we see someone, if we see someone that's going through something, maybe, mental health issue or something, we're gonna act on it. That's just how my people are, and for us, when we dive into professions where we oversee someone, or we're like security or even law enforcement, for most of my people, I know this for a fact, we embrace that position as if the community we oversee are our family members. And we take it that far and we believe that law enforcement should carry that lens as well. All of the neighborhoods and communities that you oversee and you patrol, I would encourage law enforcement to get to know those cultures and communities, to get familiar with some of the ways, especially with how different we all are. Pacific Islanders and Polynesians, Samoans, we're very different from the rest of the world. And I think it would be a brighter world when we open up to differences when it comes to cultures. When I think of law enforcement culture and my personal experience, it has been the opposite of my Polynesian culture. And as a chief of Samoa and as a chief of Polynesia, it weighs heavy on me, because I am one of 12 siblings with a ton of nieces and nephews, and the next generation is counting on Uncle Poe to make sure that they thrive, survive, and are empowered by the time they get my age. So I thank you for this opportunity to talk about culture, because there is a change and a shift that needs to happen amongst law enforcement culture. It's no wonder that, there's been a lack of accountability and lack of consequence when it comes to killings at the hands of police. It's no wonder. None of us should wonder why. Now we should take it upon ourselves to acknowledge and recognize what's going on, and then be bold enough to take the stand against it, and to flip it all, and to turn it all upside down. As one of Yosia's closest cousins, my cousin Yosia Falatomo, that was his name, who got killed by police. And I think about what I do now as far as police accountability policy, legislation, and advocacy. I remember I do this work not just for my loved ones who are still here, but I do this to honor my loved ones who are no longer here, especially those who are taken too soon at the hands of police. And so I appreciate this. Shout out to Unidos as well, and much love especially to my impacted family members in the house. I wish I could be there to give y'all hugs, and be there in space with y'all. But I appreciate the space, and that's all really that's all I had to really say. Thank you.
Thank you, Poe. Now, before I open up, I know there was a question from the audience, but there was one question that we weren't able to ask you because of audio issues. But many of us know the names and stories of your beloved family members and that you lost. And so our question is, how would you like others to share your story to honor your family?
Thank you for that beautiful question. You know, one of the best ways you can help honor my cousin is to support our work. If we are in Olympia pushing for accountability around police and true transparency, one way to honor my cousin is to follow our lead and to support us and back us up. Plain and simple. When we're out there and we're sharing our truths, another way to honor our loved ones and my cousin is to not flip the narratives and to speak on something that you really don't know about. You know, my cousin was stand-up person in our community. It was a huge loss to the Samoan community when Yosio's life was taken. So, in on behalf of the community, I think, and I feel wholeheartedly that I speak on behalf of the community when I say a couple of ways to honor my cousin and our loved one Yosia is to support us in our work to pursue accountability and consequence for the law enforcement who practice these, you know, toxic culture ways, you know, and then another way is just to flip narratives, you know, false narratives. As soon as my cousin was killed, the media and law enforcement teamed up and started to spread a lot of false fear mongering, vilifying my cousin in that moment. And now, you know, 5 years later, I'm understanding that that's the formula and that all of the families have faced that. And so those are some of the things that we can all work together as a community to bridge the gap between impacted communities and law enforcement. That's the way to do it. Come with us, you know, but it's really a place where you have to be firm in your stance. You know, you got to be firm in what we're doing because, you know, but that's a way. I appreciate that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Poe, and thank you, friends. And we did have one question in the audience. Yes. Big question. Big question.
Excuse me?
So basically, yeah, what do we do? You know what, how do we keep ourselves safe?
Well, only thing we can do to keep ourselves safe until we see changes in the culture is talk to our children. That's the only thing we can do. We're just keeping it transparent. We have to have these conversations because at this time, they're not safe. Driving, walking, or just being visible. So only thing we can do now is do what we're doing now, coming together, having open conversations about the conversations that we have to have with our children, grandchildren, and just life and being who we are. So this is the start, having open dialogue.
if I'm being 100% honest with you, we can't keep them safe. I can't keep my 6'5", 220-pound son, who's my baby, safe because how I see him is not how they see him, right? That's never going to happen. And we just have to continue to pray, continue to mobilize our community because they oftentimes don't see us as human, and there is nothing that we're going to be able to do about that. Until there is a change, a paradigm shift, until there is true accountability, until we continue to take badges, until we continue to change the culture of policing or dismantle it completely if there's just no way to reform it, we cannot keep our children safe. That's the reality of the situation. And to wake up and to know that every single day is hard. But white people need to talk to their people about the needs of us, because if all lives matter, how can all lives matter if black lives don't matter? We are a life too, right? If you're not concerned about what's happening to the Palestinian folks over there, how can all lives matter? How? Until black people get liberation, nobody else is going to get liberation, period. It's not going to happen. Indigenous people get killed at a higher rate than black people, and nobody's talking about that.
They've been eradicating indigenous people since we came, they came here. They've been trying to eradicate indigenous people. There's buried bodies. This whole land, Canada.
They're missing. They're just now talking about it.
They have their bodies buried. You know, it's sick. My son is about to go to high school. And like you said, my baby, that's my baby. He's a baby. He's 14 years old. His friends, they're 6'2", weigh 2-something. They're 14, 15-year-old kids. I took those kids after their 8th grade graduation, I took them to go see Inside Out 2. They loved it. They're still children, and they're somebody's child. If you can't get past, if you don't want to get past the racist things, you can at least look at the person, if you are in law enforcement, and know that that is somebody's child. And would you want that done to your child? And quite frankly, these officers, like the ones with my brother's case, I know for a fact, 3 of them shouldn't have even been employed as law enforcement officers. And that's documented. They should have never had the job in the first place. And I know, these, sheriff's department and law enforcement agencies, they'll take a token black person, put him in as chief of staff or chief of police, create a diverse equity inclusion specialist role. That is not how you change the culture. Even with the government, having a diversity and equity training person or group entity manager, don't try and put a black person in that role and have them literally, their job is to explain to the people in the workplace how to be inclusive to everybody. Don't do that. That doesn't do anything.
He has a question on that.
Sorry, I'm going to run the mic down to you just so the online audience can hear. And just a heads up, we only have 3 minutes, so I can only take this last question. Thank you.
Do you feel the I-940 initiative was a success or not a success?
Manny Ellis trial, that was a very biased trial. The judge didn't want to implement the changes in the law, so that's how that skated through. But we're witness today that it did work because they took out some of the phrases that used. They don't fear for your life. Reasonable assumption. What would you do if it was the other way around? So it is working.
I think that 940 is not the panacea, right? It was a start, right? It's not the end-all, be-all, but it allowed for us to at least be able to begin to start that accountability process, right? But there are still other things that have to be implemented for true justice and accountability to come into real focus. Like the Independent Office of Investigation still hasn't taken an investigation yet. We still don't have an independent prosecutor. If it goes back to the local prosecutor who still doesn't want to prosecute, where are we going to go, right? We're going nowhere. Because the reality of the situation is a prosecutor has full discretion to prosecute anybody, anytime, whether 940 was there or not. That's the reality of the situation, but they have to work together. If they threaten them too. If you don't do this, I'm not going to help you win these other things and these other cases, right? So they're held at gunpoint too.
Those police unions, I know for a fact, that's why Mary Robnett in Pierce County recused herself, because I called it out. This is not how this should work. Manny's trial shouldn't have even been in Pierce County. Counties, police can't police each other. That don't work. A person that's in an elected seat that's getting money from these police unions, how do you expect them to try to prosecute these people who are, those police unions and those police contracts? Matter of fact, you want to know something? You don't have to change anything about police union or policing. Fix that collective that arbitration agreement.
Collective bargaining.
If y'all really, if law enforcement, if y'all really are here because you want to see this stop, forget the racism stuff. Change that union agreement and put it in there. If you do this, you gonna get locked up. Because I know for a fact, a doctor can't keep killing people. Nurses can't keep having so many deaths on their records at these hospitals before license is getting revoked. You're being reported to the board of whatever you're on. The board at your hospital is firing you or giving you unpaid leave until they resolve all these cases where you've had malpractice. I don't know why we hold that up there to a higher standard, but then we let these people, for example, in Pierce County, Tacoma cops, there's not many qualifications.
Even if you don't even take that, I mean, we're seeing him be convicted of murdering the third person that he killed. Jesse Saray was the third person that was killed by Officer Nelson. He killed 2 other people before Jesse Saray. On any other circumstances, I think we call that a serial killer, right? Just because we are imagining him as a serial killer and we don't want to address it, I'm just saying. But I think our time is up.
Thank you so much to our panel. Thank you. And thank you, Poe. All right. Thank you so much. Some amazing answers, some amazing information, some incredible stories. Now, please join me in welcoming our second panel to the stage. So for our second panel, we have two members. We have Betty Jane Frizzell, a former police chief who retired from the Winfield Police Department. She began her career in 1997 to assist victims of sexual assault, and she is now living in Seattle. And Algona Police Chief James Shrimpshire. Chief Shrimpshire has been chief of Algona since 2009, and he is also vice chair and legislative chair of the Washington State Fraternal Order of Police. Oh, we have a third panel member? Sorry, we might have a third panel member. Paul's going to introduce.
We also have the Chief of Police here in the city of Everett, John DeRoos, who will be joining the panel as well. You bet. Of course. Oh, you should. You should, huh? Don't you want to come join the panel? Yeah. Oh, that's all right. That's right.
Thank you, thank you. Oh, yeah, you're good. Thank you. Yeah, we'll get you some water, too. Awesome. Welcome. Sorry about that. Thank you. Yeah, welcome. All right, and we'll kind of run the same way. I'll pass the mic, and I invite you to kind of share a little bit about yourself, your perspective, and your experience. Thank you.
Let me start down there, because I'm from Missouri.
So am I.
Oh, ladies first, I guess. I guess I have to follow that, and that was so remnant of me. I was in Ferguson when Ferguson happened, and I was teaching policing to a 100% black community, and all my students were. And I was trying to get them into those police cars or into the jails to work or to be a corrections officer. And I am happy to say from my classes that I taught, I have gotten 2 lawyers, 10 police officers, 3 probation officers, and 5 jailers. So I'm very proud of that, and they're all people of color that are in those positions. I am a speaker for LEAP, which is Law Enforcement Action Partnership, and we try to help unite communities with changing of drug policies and alternatives to incarceration. I came into policing in a different lens than most people. I am from rural Missouri, and I didn't know I had an accent till I moved out here. So rural women say a lot of things, but not a lot of people listen to us. So I was used to being a marginalized voice. One of the biggest influences on me was a black woman, a southern black woman, who taught this rural Missouri girl about Martin Luther King Jr. and about Angela Davis. There was no black history, especially where I come from. The county I come from was founded by the KKK after the Civil War. So I came at policing in a different lens because I'm from a lower socio-economic background. And then I went into policing in St. Louis, which if you don't know a lot about St. Louis, it's very segregated. Back when St. Louis was being founded, part of the city was designated off and segregated for people of color. Same thing was in my home city of Poplar Bluff, Missouri. So when I came into policing, I was at a different lens. I had been on the other side of that because everybody that I grew up with when I was a detective and I went into the Missouri police, Missouri corrections was like, oh, home week, because most of the kids that I grew up with didn't make it out of that neighborhood without a conviction or a life sentence. So these conversations are very important to me because I was raised in a time, in an era when we didn't do a lot of talking. Right now, currently, I have a sister who is serving life plus 25 years in the state of Missouri Corrections. And her case was heard by a county that has had a sheriff in the same office for over 30 years. Everybody knows everybody. This is a county of 21,000 people. That's why we need term limits on some of these sheriffs that are there after generation after generation after generation. And my sister has an IQ of 70. And when I went to go talk to the sheriff, me as a career law enforcement officer, I was again that marginalized little girl in rural southeast Missouri because I didn't have the right gender, and I was asking them to at least look into my sister's case more, because my sister should not have gotten it. It should have been her son. She took the blame for her son. And anyone that knows family dynamics about people who are abused, sometimes you have a whipping boy that comes into the family. My sister was a whipping boy, and she took this blame because that was her role in life. But when I went to the sheriff's department to talk to them about my sister's case, and to try to get them to at least open it up, I was back, that little white, rural, poor girl that no one listened to. They stripped away my doctorate degree, my 2 master's degrees, my 2 bachelor's degrees, and my Officer of the Year award. Nobody listened. So when I went and I taught in St. Louis, policing to a group that was 100% African American. I was dealing with my sister's case at the same time I was dealing with my kids, because in Missouri, 17 is an adult. And a lot of my kids I was teaching couldn't get jobs. See, how I got into St. Louis teaching was, I was a professor teaching criminal justice. And a lot of my students couldn't get jobs in law enforcement after they had a 4.0, summa cum laude, because at 17 they had gotten the wrong legal advice from some people. And now they went and they thought that 17-year-old that they were, now they're 24-year-olds with a college degree. They're a person of color that could do so much for the criminal justice system. They were women who could bring a different voice. But they had, again, had taken bad legal advice, and they'd spent all these years and didn't realize that what they said at 17 changed their life at 24. So I understand from both sides, the rural side and from the metropolitan side. So what I would like to see in police culture is, especially in rural counties, is these term limits on sheriffs, because you can't have someone in there for 30 years and not have a bias. We can't train the bias out of you. You can say that. We have to make a significant change in mindset in law enforcement. So I think my time is up, but I'll go ahead and let them go.
Good morning. As it was stated, my name is James Shrimsher. I am the police chief for the city of Algona in the day job, but I'm here in my capacity as the vice president of the Washington State chapter of the Fraternal Order of Police. That represents nearly 4,000 members, not just labor representation, but fraternal. It's the one organization that you could belong to from the time you join the academy to even in retirement. So I've been in law enforcement for 29 years, and like my colleague here on the podium before me, I started my law enforcement career in Missouri. So no, she says Missouri, and I say Missouri, and giving her, yeah. It just shows you the demographics. Her hometown's probably 80 miles from my hometown. But we all talk different. We all, it's very isolated. But I was very fortunate. I grew up in a small town in Missouri, son of a Baptist minister, and I learned my values there. And I went into the military for 6 years, where I met my lovely wife back there. And she is also a 29-year law enforcement veteran as well. But one thing that I have grown over my law enforcement career, I like to say, I was a real hard charger in my younger years, and then as I progressed, I stumbled, I've hit roadblocks, but as I progressed and gotten to where I am today, I learned a lot. And I've taken those experiences of my brothers and sisters and tried to represent them the best I can. I represent the Fraternal Order of Police in Olympia and in Washington, D.C. at a national level. I'm also very proud of the fact that my daughter is now in the family business and is a law enforcement veteran, and her husband as well. So I come from, my wife and I don't think we started out starting a family business, but we did. And so we're here today. I also was on with Katrina. I consider her a friend. We were on the governor's task force together that created the Office of Independent Investigation. And I now serve with Poe, who joined us virtually, on the advisory board for the Office of Independent Investigation. So the FOP is kind of, at least here in Washington State, has a little bit different approach about how we approach law enforcement issues and how we work together with the communities we serve. We like to be known as the middle of the road voice. We recognize that 99.99% of every law enforcement officer out there, peace officers, as I like to call them, are out there doing a great job every day, and they're trying to serve their community. It's that 10th and 1% that we focus on, and we also acknowledge that we can do better, that the days of trust us, we know good policing are gone, and that we need to move forward, and we need to do that with the communities we serve. And so I've been at the legislative home now probably 8 years, and that is the mindset that I have taken, and it makes me very proud to represent a group and that has that philosophy. So.
I think I learned a lesson today. I did not sit in the front row. I wasn't supposed to be up here. But Paul, I owe you one, so thank you for that. My name is John DeRoos. I'm the Chief of Police here in Everett. I've been in law enforcement coming up on 30 years. Only been chief since November, but I'm not new to Everett. I've raised my family here. I live in this community, and I worked under previous chief Dan Templeman, who was chief for about 9.5 years before I got promoted. One of the things that's most important to me is not sitting in front of a group of people talking. I'm a listener. Like, I really think it's important to listen to the community, and that means a lot of times not saying anything, just listening, really truly listening. I've heard a lot of things already this morning that I really agree with, and I think one of the most important things that a law enforcement agency can do is build relationships with the community that they serve. And that starts with good conversation, breaking bread, sitting down, understanding what paths they've walked down. And even though I've done this for 30 years, I feel like it's always something we should be doing. You don't solve the equation when it comes to relationships. They are ongoing. And so even though Paul did me a solid by putting me up here, I think, and I guess we're supposed to talk a little bit, I'm going to do my best to listen both to my peers and to you in this crowd and take a little bit away. I've already taken a bunch of notes this morning, and I will continue to. So thanks to Juan and the work that's being done to try to improve those relationships, us at the Everett Police Department, we want to continue to be part of them.
Thank you. All right, so we do have 2 questions. The first is, how do you continue the dialogue between law enforcement, community advocates, legislators, and impacted community members?
So, and thank you. So, for the Fraternal Order of Police, it's being engaged on all 3 fronts. We have to do a tough job. We have to walk a fine line because we have members that want to feel represented, and at the same time, those members have a very tough job, and we have to respect that their well-being, their mental, their ability to do their job, officer wellness, those kind of things, we have to take those into consideration. Second is engaging our legislators when the policy making is going on and being able to have that dialogue and be that middle of the road voice, not always saying no, but talking about, well, what does this look like as we move forward together? And then third, getting the feedback from our community, because ultimately we work for the communities that we serve, as the good chief said. And we have to be able to take that feedback, and we have to be able to look at how we're doing things and making sure we're doing things in the best possible light to get the best possible outcome.
Are you listening? I think, because I'm still in a law enforcement capacity now here in Washington State, but I think we need to think about people we police as people that matter as we matter, that us against them a mentality, that control that we want so bad. Because that's what, when I came to out here, it was a totally different world than Missouri Police Academy. Out here, they were doing yoga. I went through a paramilitary police academy where we ran all the time with chairs. I think if we are mindful, the mindfulness of what we're doing, and to understand just because everybody has value, and see people as people, not problems. Don't go into it as there's a problem. No, these are people with ideas and dreams and hopes. And just because you don't understand their culture, or their culture is so different than yours, because I'm married to a Pacific Northwesterner. Y'all don't know how to cook out here. So I can tell you that there's a cultural difference just in that. What? That's right. It's bland. Y'all don't know what spices are. So we got to understand and appreciate cultural differences and get some diversity. I'm so glad that we have a female sheriff here that is representing female communities, because I can remember being a young officer and being in a rural county where I had a sheriff who just threw me into sex crimes because I was the only female. They didn't want to deal with it. But we have to remember, any takeaway that you have from my rambling, is that we have to understand that people that we police are people who matter just like we do.
Yeah, I'll be quick. It's a very long, there's lots of information there that can be discussed in that question. And I think that I've talked about relationships, and I think to build relationships, you got to get outside the precinct. I think a lot of times police departments invite, come meet us at the precinct, we'll host a meeting. I think you have to get outside of that. You have to go where people are most comfortable, not where you're most comfortable. Maybe that's the lesson from being up here on stage in front of all y'all, that you got to get outside your comfort zone sometimes. And coupled with that, and I'll finish with it, is I began this most latest iteration as a police chief with the end in mind, a real Stephen Covey type approach. And that means the men and women that do the job at the Everett Police Department, teaching them that same thing now, putting them in spaces where they're out in the community having dialogue, listening. Those lessons should be taught by everybody, so that when I'm gone, and there's an expiration on this job, I recognize that, when I'm gone, those men and women can step up in our place and continue that dialogue on. It doesn't stop, have to be reinvented, and then you go right back to the building of those relationships. It should just be ongoing, and I'll stop there.
Thank you. And so our second question, if you had a magic button, how would you change police culture to promote accountability, build trust, and save lives, especially in communities of color?
I think the magic button's here in the legislature. One of the things talking about changing culture is creating regional academies so that the community can be more involved with police training. Senator Lovick back there, he likes to give everybody else the credit, but what I would tell you is, and Representative Davis and Representative Ramos as well, they were all key in getting regional academies funded. There's one slated to be in this area, right? But what it does is my panel member over here can tell you, in the state of Missouri, you have academies that are taught in the community, by the community. That is one of the ways that you can help change culture, because you will be policing, you will be learning how to police communities that you are living in and you are protecting in. And I think that's one of the big keys, and I think that magic button was pushed when the legislature funded those regional academies. So for me, that's one way we can do it. We start from day one at the academy and start shifting that culture to the service. So.
I'm glad that you brought up Stephen Covey, because Stephen Covey says accountability breeds responsibility. And I think that we are more accountable. Qualified immunity in Missouri has gotten a lot of people away with a lot of murders. And if anyone knows the whole Darren Wilson, who was the officer involved in the Mike Brown shooting, that he was a muni shuffler, which means he would go from one municipality to another municipality to another municipality. St. Louis University did a great study on them and on how a police department doesn't fire the problem. They keep putting it out and making it someone else. And I think our panel before us spoke that. So, but I think one thing that we can do to help with change is to retain officers, not that the term limits for sheriffs, because that's a totally different thing. They're elected officials, especially where I come from. I think that if we retain officers that have a vested interest in their communities that they serve, and they are willing to allow themselves to learn the culture of that community, to learn that we are different, but we're the same. We want the same things. But we have to be willing to put ourselves out there and learn that. And I think you do a better job of it than we do in Missouri, for sure. Because I'm so invested in, I live here, but I'm so invested in Missouri and changing the law there. But I see that you guys do a lot of great things that you still do, but we're still a lot of work ahead.
There's no magic button. There's no secret sauce. It's all work. Relationships are work. Relationship with my wife is work. Sometimes more than it probably should be, but there's just a constant dedication to work that's involved. Had an opportunity to speak in front of a group recently, and I'll tell you two things. They're not magic wands. They're not magic buttons, but I think they're really beneficial in helping police departments improve relationships with the community. One is moms, getting to know moms in our community, especially in our black and brown communities. They're the ones that a lot of the matriarchs of the family, they're the ones, if you explain to them how you do business, if you explain what we're doing, if you explain what we can offer as a police profession, if you show them, come in and let me show you the department and what we do and what we don't do, they're the first ones, and they have, that recommend maybe their sons or daughters to a life in policing. One where you're not just collecting a paycheck, but you have a voice that you can come in and help change the culture from within it. So that's one, not a magic wand, but it's really important to me as a police chief. The second one is our churches. Everybody talks about separation of church and state. A lot of our churches speak for their community, and I think police departments need to get back into a lot of these churches. They need to be talking to your pastors, unless they trick them into getting on stage. Yeah, I'm not going to forget about it, Paul. And but I think those relationships are really important. These are community members that come together that maybe are uncertain about how law enforcement works. And policing need to get in there and hear what they need and want within their community. So not magic wands, but two things that we're actively working on in Everett to maybe improve our relationships.
Thank you, thank you. So we actually did receive a question from the audience, which heads up, we do have pens and Post-its in the back if you want to write one down. And in full transparency, I'm not very familiar with this term, but where do you stand on excited delirium as a cause of death?
All right, I got the first one. So excited delirium. It's as science has changed a little bit, and forgive me, I don't know the terminology, but the medical journal does no longer recognize excited delirium as a cause of death. I will tell you that having been involved in extreme situations where someone has essentially fought themselves to death or been in a hyper state, that there is a physiologically some type of change. I watched a 125-pound man snap a pair of handcuffs. You know, it's almost like they had superhuman strength and run down a hallway and just fall over. So there is something to there, you know, when people get in that state and they just fight until their body gives up. So there is something to it, whether it's called excited delirium, whether, you know, whatever term. But when someone is in that hyper state, there is a physiological change that comes across. And again, I'm not a doctor. I'm just an old beat cop that moved up through the ranks. But I can tell you from my experience that there is some type of change in a person, and we have to, as law enforcement, and this is one thing I'm very proud about how the training has gone, my crew, law enforcement in general, that we are starting to recognize those things and starting to call aid earlier and starting to look at things instead of putting people in handcuffs, coming up with different types of restraint devices that keep them in a recovery position. So I think it's something that we're becoming very cognizant about, and that we're progressing toward in having those conversations. Just this last session in the legislature, talking about a restraint system that keeps people upright. We engaged our public safety partners, the medics, to talk about, hey, this system allows us to still treat the person. So those kind of things, and thinking outside the box. So.
I think that we need to just make it carte blanche that if there is a death in a custody, there's an investigation, and we're not policing ourselves. I agree with that totally, because that's what's happened a lot in Missouri, and a lot of things have went under the rug with what I was involved with in the North St. Louis area. That is one thing that we have to realize, that we need to have these investigations, and they need to be ongoing by special prosecutors and getting these places in so it's common practice. And start comparing ourselves to other law enforcement agencies in the world. I just got back from England, and we got to spend some time with British police officers who just recently had gotten their guns. Some of them still don't carry guns. And I come from a gun culture in Missouri, and it was totally foreign to me to see these police officers without guns. So what is, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and get the same results. I think that we just need to continue to progress and have these conversations and learn more about what is the correct way. And I want every death that is involved with an officer investigated. So.
Yeah, for those that don't know, excited delirium is a term that's it was in fashion, I guess, and out of fashion as a term for when an officer or officers take somebody into custody, especially somebody that's in a very agitated state, that they died in their custody. I've heard it called sudden in custody death syndrome. I've heard it a bunch of different medical terms. The problem is when you label something, sometimes it gives it an excuse. And so the question was, what do I stand on it? I stand on it. We don't use it because it's not a term that's used anymore. But the fact is there's times where a death occurs in the custody of law enforcement, and we need to investigate it. We need to figure out why it occurred, not say, oh, it's a medical condition, and we're done. So I think what's really important, to echo a little bit of what's said already, is that if somebody dies in the custody of law enforcement, we need to investigate it and figure out what happened and what caused that. With this particular discussion point, we have policies in place at the Everett Police Department. If somebody's exhibiting those signs, we get we get fire and route early. They stay, we call it staging, they stay by in the area, and once we get a hold of them, they come in and they treat it as a medical issue, not an arrest issue. There's drugs that they can administer, there's other things they can do, because it'll be really important at that point to maintain their health more than anything else.
Thank you. And we did have a quick follow-up from the audience, real quick. Did you still want?
I just wanted to clarify, because I heard excited delirium, and then I got excited. I heard you say that you guys don't use that language, because, I mean, I guess for me, when I hear excited delirium and officer-involved death, it does sound like an excuse, especially when, they say, oh, well, I did this because I was just trying to act. I was just trying to restrain. I was just trying to this. But your job is to be able to act in times where it's a stressful situation, and you're supposed to keep a cool and level head, right? So my thing is like, how do we get everyone to step away from that excited delirium name? Because like you said, it sounds like it's an excuse, and also it's not even an actual diagnosis of anything. And if law enforcement is gonna adopt that as a diagnosis or a meaning, what type of training will officers then have to be able to put that in a police report or write that down?
Thank you.
All right, so thank you for the question. And again, like the good chief mentioned, a majority of the agencies in Washington State have moved away from using that term several years ago. That being said, there's also policies in place, like the good chief here said, even my small department, we have policies in place. And then that also involves training officers on those policies, like, look, we need to treat it like a medical condition. For example, I've been the police chief now for 6.5 years. One of the first things I did was ban hobbles and restraints, right? And instead, we called the aid crew. We strapped them to a gurney. Now we use a device called a wrap that puts them, it's basically a human taco, but it puts them in an upright position. The aid crew can still treat them. We're allowed to take them from one position to the other. Those kind of devices are being instituted, and we train our officers to those policies. And you're starting to see a shift, at least from the data that I see and from where I go around the state, you're starting to see a shift where aid is getting called sooner. Not only are they staging, but we're not treating these situations like someone's being combative. We're treating them like, and I love his term, like a medical condition. And that's one of the things, and that's how you change that culture. You start with a good, solid policy. You start training the people to that policy, and it starts in the academy, and it continues, and that you need buy-in. So.
I think that law enforcement agencies need to have that buy-in where they are continually trying to learn about the science, continually trying to see other methods and find other ways of conflict resolution with people. Mental illness is very near and dear to me. I'm a speaker for NAMI, National Alliance on Mental Illness, because of my sister's case and how it was handled. But I think that if we get that buy-in of that from the beginning, because the police chiefs and the sheriffs, they set the culture for the department. And if we get that and we continually progress, maybe we'll get more of a better understanding and not have that these problems that we've been seeing recently.
Yeah, I just made a note. I can't remember if it's in our policy or was a training bulletin. I don't want officers doing any diagnosis. That's not our job. So we just keep that language completely out of our reports. We respond, we react to what's in front of us, hopefully get the people to the medical crew if they need to, but we shouldn't be doing diagnosis in our reports.
Beautiful. Thank you. And I apologize, it is actually time for lunch. I know, I'm so sorry. Tight agenda today.
Asians usually don't have an opportunity to speak. They're a different speak channel, and we usually only get a coffee guy, right? So that's the thing. Asians are attacked every single day, and they're killed about once a week. And my question is about culture. How can we train the cops? The cops don't know about this, and we don't get an opportunity to speak. So many times.
And I thank you for that. And I was going to say, I know we have a tight agenda, so if you do have questions that we're not able to get to, please save them, please write them down, because we can carry them to our next event, because we do value your questions, and we apologize for the tight time. We will have a sheriff panel after lunch, so we can also ask that question there. So thank you very much. Now, for lunch, thank you again to our panel, first of our police chiefs. And so we have tamales towards the back. We also have some bottled water. We have the rajas tamales, that's our vegetarian option. And then we also have chicken. So thank you. announcement. Someone is parked in a loading zone. If you are parked in the loading zone, please move your vehicle. Thank you. And if you're not sure if you're parked in front and blocking that, please feel free to go check. But welcome back, welcome back. Want to check, are we good with our, yeah. So, as you see, we have our third panel on the stage, our sheriff panel. So please join me in welcoming Sheriff Susanna Johnson. Yes. Former Deputy Chief of Police for the City of Bothell and our recently elected and current Snohomish County Sheriff. And we also have Senator John Lovick. Senator John Lovick started his career working with Washington State Parole and later served as Snohomish County Sheriff between 2008 and 2012. Now, before I will let you introduce yourself, share perspectives, and then we're going to move to one question from the audience, and then we have two planned questions, and then we'll go back to questions from the audience if we have time. So I'm going to let you all do a quick introduction, and then we'll jump into that question from the audience. Thank you.
First of all, good afternoon, and thank you for the kind introduction. And I just want to say this. Many, many years ago, growing up in Louisiana, I heard the phrase, unspoken praise is of value to no one. And what that meant to me is that if we don't really take the time to really thank people for the great work that they have done, that's unspoken praise. So I just think we should give a big hand to this organization for bringing this together. You know, I think it's just, I believe it's been absolutely wonderful because, you know, if we don't sit down and talk to each other and get to know each other, we're not going to solve the problems that we're going to have to deal with. The next quick thing that I'm going to say is that I once heard years ago, it went something like this. It said, bad news does not get better with time. For those of us in the military, we used to hear that all the time. Bad news is not going to get better with time. So I said that to say this. We're talking about culture of policing. And I was told many, many years ago, and Sheriff Johnson and I have talked about this many times, if we want to change the culture of policing, we better become one. By that I mean become a reserve, become a volunteer, or recruit people to get into the profession to change the culture of policing. I want to share with you 3 quick things that impacted me. I tell people that I'm black, I'm brown, and I'm blue. And what I mean by that is that I'm a black man, my skin tone is brown, but I proudly wore the uniform as a state trooper for 31 years. So that makes me blue. People will say, you used to be a state trooper? I said, no, I am a state trooper. I have no police authority unless she gives me some, but I'm still a state trooper. But I'm going to share with you quickly, and I don't mean this to be demeaning to anyone. I want to share with you quickly 3 things. I always tell people that I heard Chief Shrimpshire from Algona talk about this being the family business. Law enforcement, to me, is the family business. I spent years in law enforcement, I had a cousin in law enforcement, other relatives in law enforcement. We were, and still are proud of the profession of law enforcement. But I'm going to share with you briefly, and then I'm going to hand the mic over to my good friend, three things that really impacted me with respect to law enforcement. My wife and I moved into our home in Mill Creek in 1992. And my oldest son was at the time 18 years old, and he had about 10 of his high school friends from Jackson High down in the basement shooting pool, doing all of those things that you want a 17 or an 18-year-old to do on a Saturday night. What would you want your kids to be doing? You don't want them out doing bad things. They were down in the basement playing pool. We got up the next morning and we struggled to buy him a 1974 Chevrolet Nova. Now picture that car, if you will. He had a 1974 Chevrolet Nova, parked on the street along with other cars from other kids who were there, and most of them were Mercedes or different cars. But we got up Sunday morning, the kids were all in the basement playing pool. We got up Sunday morning, and guess which car had a ticket on the windshield? Have you figured that one out yet? The 1974 Chevy Nova registered to Jeffrey Lovick. Now, Jeffrey is now a police officer with the Los Angeles Police Department. But there was a ticket on the Chevy Nova for being parked slightly on the curb, if you would call it that. None of the other cars had tickets on the windshield, but that Chevy Nova had a ticket on the windshield. Mill Creek Police Department, and I love them, they had to be having a slow day that night. But they took the time to write a ticket on that 1974 Chevy Nova. The second thing that really impacted me and had me really take a look at the profession was after I was promoted to sergeant. There was a pursuit through Mill Creek, and I was one of these guys who terminated a lot of pursuits. But on this particular pursuit, 4 o'clock in the morning, I decided to allow the pursuit to continue. I get to the scene on Cathcart, after the pursuit ended, I get to the scene on Cathcart Way, and I pull up to the scene. Many officers there, I won't call any names of any of the agencies that were there, and one officer had his foot on the suspect's head. Now imagine that. He had his foot on the suspect's head. I said, "Take your foot off of his head." The officer turned and got nose to me. He said, "Okay, Sergeant!" Turned and left. Culture. No one was going to tell that officer to take his foot off of the officer's neck. Never going to tell the agency. The next thing that happened to me that really impacted what I do, and I want you to know this, I have the greatest respect for men and women in the law enforcement profession. As a matter of fact, I'm going to read you a quote by a gentleman by the name of Charlie Beck. Charlie Beck is the retired police chief of the Los Angeles Police Department. My son worked for him for many years. He said, "We select from the human race, and the human race is flawed." He said, whether it's the clergy, teaching, media, people fail. Unfortunately, when a police officer fails, it is spectacular. Can anybody here disagree with that? When a police officer fails, it is spectacular. So I'm going to share one last story, and then I swear you're going to be happy I hand this mic over to my dear friend, Sheriff Johnson. Many years ago, I was invited by a police agency for an interview. This was right after we passed the Initiative 940. And here's how I introduced myself. Imagine this introduction. I said, "My name is John Lovick. I served 31 years with the Washington State Patrol. I spent 5 years on the Mill Creek City Council. The City Council selected me as the Mayor Pro Tem. I had spent at that time 11 years in the legislature. I was the Snohomish County Sheriff, the Snohomish County Executive, and I said a few more things, and I said, trust me, I can keep a job. I don't want you guys to think that I'm not able to keep a job. I can keep a job. But I ended by saying, I am the proudest husband, father, and grandfather. Law enforcement is the family business with us. I stepped away, and because I had supported and worked with Initiative 940, and we called it a triumph of compromise, was what that initiative was. I literally felt horrible by the questions that I was asked, by the way I was treated. And I'm not saying this to say feel sorry for me, but I'm saying that to say this. I walked away from there thinking to myself, if with my resume, 13 years in the Coast Guard, 31 years with the State Patrol, the legislature, being Speaker of the House at the time, if I could have walked away from there and I could have been treated that way, how would they treat my cousin, my brother, my nephew, my son? So it left me thinking, without a doubt, that it is the culture. So with that, I keep a sign in my office, and if you've been to my office in Olympia, it says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And what I mean by that, it doesn't matter what the strategy is, it's the culture that we are here talking about today. We are going to have to work to change the culture. And I'm going to agree with one more thing that Chief Shrimpsher said. He said 99.9999% of the men and women in the law enforcement profession go out there, work their tails off, and do their job to the best of their ability. It's that one that Charlie Beck talked about, that those are the ones that are not. So thank you for being here, and thank you. I believe we're going to change the culture, and I'm sorry I took so much time.
You can take more time if you like. That was awesome. Then I also speak less. Appreciate this opportunity. I want to thank the impacted families who started us off today. I learned a lot. I have a couple pages of notes, and I appreciate the opportunity to hear their stories. The only thing I wanted to add, I don't want to talk about me or my resume. I do want to add I am from this community. I've coached kids for over 30 years, that we all care about the community, and I appreciate everybody on a Saturday in June for coming in and spending the day, because there's work to be done, so I just want to acknowledge that. I ran for county sheriff. Like many folks who are stepping up as leaders currently, we recognize that reform in the profession is necessary. You know, we obviously get our power and our authority from the community, so we must represent the community. And I like what Chief Drew said earlier with regard, we're here to listen, and that's what I came to do today. So I'm not going to speak for very long, but I'm happy to entertain questions. Some of the things that I've been asked about is some of the reform bills, and I know we have representatives in the audience. I think if you talk to the average law enforcement officer that continues to serve today, that served before the murder of George Floyd, you would see that the majority are embracing the change. Many left, and it's okay that people left the profession. We recognize that there's work to be done to build that trust, and that's why if you go out and you look at agencies that were first adopting body-worn cameras, by and large, those officers, deputies, and troopers said, yes, put a camera on me. Why is that? Do you want to know why that is? Because when we get dressed in the morning and people come into the profession, it's because we believe we're doing the right thing. We believe we're following the appropriate training, and I'm going to get to culture and why there's this split. But put a camera on me, you bet. And if I make a mistake, hold me accountable. That is the vast majority that Senator Lovick and I have seen over our careers. And I understand the problems with the bad apple analogy, and I will agree that not only bad people will do bad things, and regardless of legislation and policies, they're going to continue to do bad things. And it's our absolute responsibility to you and to the men and women that serve to get rid of those folks. We don't want them in uniform either. But I will also acknowledge that we will see around this country entire agencies where we see misconduct. And why is that? How can I sit here and say the majority are great, but we can see entire agencies? And that's what brings us today, and that's culture. That is culture. So I do want to mention, I think a lot of the laws, and for some of you that are from out of this state, the things we've seen is I no longer, as the CEO of an agency, can decide on my own if somebody can keep that badge. Use of force, bias, and integrity will remove that badge from you, and our academy now makes that decision. Now, 10 years ago, I would say that's not necessary, because I had the luxury of working around leaders that I saw do the right thing. If I saw something bad happen, I saw that person lose their job. But I've also seen, now that I'm older, that not everybody does that. And there are agencies that will keep people that have been caught being dishonest or maybe in an inappropriate use of force or bias pre-2021 in Washington State. So I'm not saying we're there. There's work to be done. But I also think mistakes happen along the way. And so the important thing for me is to listen to my community and work with my representatives in Olympia, because sometimes I get it right and sometimes we get it wrong, but we all want to have a seat at that table. And, you know, I think that there's some things that we need to continue to work on for sure. But now I want to mention culture. If I have, it doesn't matter, again, what the legislation says or the policy says, is as a sheriff, I'm going to ignore those. Not everything sees the light of day. We're better now with body-worn cameras, but we can see this in the country, right? If you go look, there are agencies out there in this country and locally in this state that have a good reputation with their community, that are accredited, hardworking law enforcement agencies that work hard to build those relationships, that come out on Saturdays and listen and admit when they're wrong, and admit when we need to make change,
And those are the agencies that have it in their culture. And that means leader after leader have come in front of them and talked about vision and talk about service. And those are the things that I've been doing at the sheriff's office in the 6 months I've been there. We have amazing law enforcement professionals in this county, and I am honored to work where I work. And where we see mistakes or misconduct, we address it. But the spirit of the conversation is about service, it's about integrity, it's about transparency, and it never stops. It has to be constant. And unfortunately, sometimes examples occur. If an employee does something they shouldn't do, and they shouldn't have their job anymore, that's the outcome. And although difficult, that's what we get paid to do, is to make those difficult decisions. And that's how we shift the culture. So I do want to talk, we can talk about legislation, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with me and other leaders in law enforcement. And this is the process in which we can do it. So appreciate my time and ready for the hard questions.
Can I just say this real quick? I've had more than a few conversations with this lady. She probably will tell you that she and I were out on the streets almost every day last year. And I won't say what we were out on the streets doing. We weren't fighting crime, but we were out doing a lot of things. But every time that I talked to her, I heard the word integrity. And I couldn't even spell integrity before that. But I could spell it backwards. I could spell it sideways. I could put it on a bingo board and say it. This is what the profession is about. I know she said something, and I'm not here just to praise her, but she talked about the unfortunate thing that, and I know the chief might agree with this, about the fact that in some cases we are losing police officers. I really hate to see us lose officers, but there are officers that should not, and I'm going to say this, I'm stated parenthetically, should not be in the profession. But we are bringing men and women into the profession who I believe will change the culture of policing. Chief Shrimpsher talked about the regional academies. We have 56 peace officers patrolling the streets in Eastern Washington because of regional academies. We have another 30 down in Vancouver. And I'm going to let you guys know a little secret. I am trying everything I can, and I'm going to tell the new members, Representative Davis and Representative Ramos, I am trying like mad to get this old Kendall auto supply place. I'm trying to get that as a regional academy. Can you imagine, if you will, coming southbound and northbound on Interstate 5, looking over on Marine View Drive and seeing Northwest Regional Academy there? I bet you could put all of your officers right there, Chief. You could probably train all of your officers, all of your vacancies. But we're going to change the culture by bringing bringing men and women who want to change that culture. So thank you for always mentioning integrity. I really appreciate it.
And to start us off, a question from the audience.
Well, with the learning and culture, great segue, thank you. So my question is about training. So a lot of people and a lot of cops don't know that Asians are attacked every day violently, and they're murdered about once a week. And I want police to know this so they can start to understand that there is hate against Asians, and it starts with go back home and whatever you fucking chink, sorry, but that's the language, and then what follows after that. And I would like police professionals to understand this. How can we get training? And I was recording on my podcast with a former police captain, and he was telling me it's very difficult. Even an hour of training takes, all this time. So if there are some creative ways to insert 5 minutes here and there to talk about culture, so then they can be more informed to be able to protect us too. Thank you.
Senator Lovick was good enough to give me the microphone, which I appreciate. I appreciate you bringing that up. I think crime is horrible in general, but when people are targeted because of the color of their skin or their religion or their gender or their sexual preference, it's injury on top of injury. I know your question's about training. I've seen the requirements for training of law enforcement officers consistently increasing each year, which is a good thing, but we do have to facilitate it. That's a good point. because somebody always has to be working patrol while we provide additional training. We do a lot of training, and we have training in hate crimes. We do have training in bias. If you're seeing, I'd love to connect with you afterwards of where you think we might have gaps, so that would be very helpful to me. One of the things that I realized, and this has been especially the last 5 or 10 years with regard to Asians being targeted, is communicating to law enforcement that it's not just the time to take the report when the crimes occurred, but also where they're experienced bias and hate speech, right? Even if it's protected speech, that we have to pay attention to that and take reports and meet with the community, because that's when it's unabated, escalates, and understanding the importance of that. And also with regard to crime prevention components, like spending times in the community, how to be safe, and what your rights are, and the best way to get help in an emergency. So that not only can we partner and listen, but also literally make you safer in the community.
You know, I appreciate the question also. You know, one of the things that during the time that I was in law enforcement, I always tried to emphasize, I wanted people to not only be safe, but I wanted them to feel safe. Because you can be safe, and if you don't feel safe, it's going to change everything you do. I'll give you just a quick story. I try and go out and visit 5th and 6th graders in my district. And I was speaking to some 5th graders by Zoom. And a young Asian girl came on the Zoom to talk. And I got to tell you this, I have 5 children and 5 grandchildren, and it just crushed my heart when the topic that she talked about, a 5th grader talked about how Asians are hated. I just can't, I couldn't imagine it. I know what it was like growing up in Louisiana and being hated and being treated poorly. But this is 2024 for a 5th grader to have to say that. I would love to, I don't rush out of these things, I would love to talk with you before we leave, because those are the kind of things, and if there are maybe some conversations we could have with the director of the Criminal Justice Training Commission, Director Alexandria, just have some conversations with her about that. But thank you for not only being here, but also for taking the time to ask the question. Thank you.
We do have, and just a reminder, I know I see so many hands and so many questions. We are not going to get to everyone. We do have one other question from the audience, so I'm going to walk the mic over. No, I'm sorry. I know, I saw your hand, sir. She actually went first. I'm really sorry. Here.
Hello, my name is Pamela C. Munster, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Snohomish Tribe, and your badge has my tribal name on it. And I kind of want to hear about police officers. I know there was some police officers slated to be fired at one point before Adam Fortney took office, and he hired a couple of police officers that were fired. He rehired them. And then something else he did was take black boxes out of all of the Snohomish County Sheriff vehicles. And I'm wondering if you're willing to put those black boxes back in, and how the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office is going to change the way they hire officers. Thank you.
Thank you. And yes, I'm very proud to wear the name of Snohomish Tribe on our badge. Thank you. And the contributions of the tribe to the community. So yes, the sheriff before me, Sheriff Adam Fortney, did rehire some employees. There was 3 of them that were fired by the previous sheriff. That was Ty Trenery. He did rehire 3. They have gone through a process. I can't come in and fire them. They've had their due process. Of the 3, 2 still work at the sheriff's office. 1 left the state after some of the reform laws came into effect. So there's nothing I can do with them. They are working and contributing, and my hope is they're going to continue to serve well. They've been serving well, but of course we need to keep an eye on that. But there's nothing I can do with them just because they've had their due process. But they are current employees, and again, they're serving well at this time. If that changes, we would address that. On the black boxes, that was telematics. That actually came part of my administration. I was not involved with that, but that was also under Sheriff Ty. And at the time, and if you wanted to get data such as car speed and that sort of thing, you had to pay to have that installed in vehicles. And I believe the cost was around $750 a vehicle. You know, we have take-home cars, so that's a fleet of about 300 vehicles. That went away under Adam. I don't plan to bring it back because we actually can get that data out of our laptops now. So every car that's out there patrolling, we know GPS on them, we can get speed on them. So we're specifically not going back to that, but we do get that data. Was there a third question? I'm sorry. I apologize. Does that answer all your question?
I just wanted to know, how are you going to change the way you hire?
Gotcha.
Or will you change the way you hire? Would you be hiring officers like that who have that kind of crude misconduct and rehire them? And are you, like for instance, Ian Burke killed an American Indian in the city of Seattle. His name was John T. And John Williams was killed by Ian Burke, and then he was fired by the Seattle Police Department, and then he was hired by the city of Edmonds. And so I'm wondering about Snohomish County Sheriff's Office and how they hire, and whether or not, you know, is that kind of hiring going to continue, or is that something you would look at and not hire somebody like that?
Sure. So with regard to hiring standards, there is some requirements that come through the Criminal Justice Training Commission and by RCW and WAC. So we do have some restrictions on that, which is helpful. There's criteria that's newer in the last few years, but the buck stops with me. In my particular administration, I make every final hiring decision. That has not always been the case of every sheriff at the sheriff's office, but I do. So anybody that's on the streets right now wearing our uniform, I stand behind. And I look at all those very seriously, of course. And that particular individual, I think, had tested for the sheriff's office a few years ago. We took a pass on him. But for the most part, we get a lot of people at our door, and this is for all of the law enforcement agencies. A couple things, I'm just going to hijack this question to share, that it is very difficult typically to get hired because of all the requirements to come in, and not every state has the same hiring requirements we do, not only the psychological, poly, and drug screen, but we go through their history, and you know, hopefully every CEO will stand behind who they hire. But we take people that want to come serve, and then we have not always done a good job as leaders with mental health and seeing the worst of humanity, you know, decade after decade. And so part of our commitment is also taking care of them so that they're not really stressed out and sleep deprived because we've allowed them to work too much off duty. These are rules and policies we have in place so that when that use of force decision comes, that we've best armed them to do that because they're getting rest at night, they get that work-life balance, and you know, we're following policies. So I can say that I had one person come through for testing that had a hate symbol as a tattoo, and I showed him the door.
Can I just, yes, can we just give her a hand? I just have to, thank you for that. But I just have to say this to you. She was the lieutenant, and she sat next to me on hiring decisions that I made. And I remember going to her once. I had a person I was hiring who was going to be the director of communications. And I wasn't sure how to go. And I turned to her, and we asked her one question. She said, "What would you do for the sheriff's office?" I don't know if you remember this. And this lady by the name of Sherry Ireton looked at both of us, and she said, "Sir, I can promise you this. I will keep you in the news and out of the news." Now think about that. I said, "Keep me in the news and out of the news." She said, "The sheriff's office will be in the news for the great work that it's doing, but if you listen to me and listen to us, you will not be in the news for the stupid things that you will not do." And this is the type of person she is. I know the quality of the people she's hiring, and I feel very, very confident. I'm just thrilled beyond words that she is our sheriff, and that's why you will see me limping around, because I walked a lot last year, door to door to door to door to door, to make sure she becomes sheriff. So thank you.
And with that, I apologize again for this very tight agenda, but that is all the time we have for our sheriff's panel. So let's give another round of applause for Sheriff Susanna Johnson and Senator John Lovett. Thank you. So our next speaker, thank you, is an author. So our next speaker is attorney and author Jessica Pishko. Her book, The Highest Law in the Land, The Unchecked Power of Sheriffs Threatens Democracy, is coming out in the fall and is an analysis of how sheriffs around the country have been embedded in toxic and white supremacist culture and avoided accountability for years. Coming from my home state of North Carolina, Jessica will be sharing a bit about what she uncovered in her research and analysis creating her book. So please join me in welcoming Jessica to the stage. Also warning, I'm going to be moving things around. And you get a nice, if you want to walk around, you do have a nice thing here.
Oh, thank you so much. So, hi, I'm Jessica Pishko. I am using a few slides just to add a little audio-visual aid to some of this. Is that one better? Okay. Let's give it a test. All right. Is this better? It is. I can't. Ooh, ooh. All right. I can't tell if it's better or not. Okay, excellent. Thank you. So as you guys kindly heard in my introduction, I'm a lawyer and a writer. So I've been writing about sheriffs across the country and been studying them for about 8 years. So a lot of my experience and what I am best qualified to talk about is kind of how to think about elected sheriffs in particular in a national context, right? So obviously, you guys are in Washington State, and there's like particulars to Washington State sheriffs and how they operate and the laws that apply. And what I wanted to do is give you guys an overall view of some of the far-right sheriff movements that you might have heard of that do exist in Washington State. Gratefully not here anymore since you guys elected your new sheriff. And I think one of the things I wanted to do to center the conversation when we talk about what some people call the constitutional sheriff movement, I sometimes call it the far-right sheriff movement. And I kind of want to center talking about this in a way that connects it to some of the other panels, right? So when we had that first panel, one of the things that someone said that struck me was that talking about kind of this problem of systemic racism, right? Like the problem of systemic racism, not just in law enforcement and jails and prisons and policing, but also in healthcare and so many other parts of society. And I think when we talk a little bit about these particular types of sheriffs that some of you guys may have heard of, it's important to kind of root it in the idea that the thing that makes them most relevant is not just that they're sort of particularly unaccountable, that they might be particularly racist, but also that they're the sort of outgrowth of a system that is based in white supremacy. I think sometimes these conversations about these far-right movements that are unfortunately kind of experiencing a new, they're experiencing a new renaissance, is that we have to remember that that we wouldn't flower in police departments and in sheriff departments if there wasn't already kind of a culture of white supremacy. So I always think that that's like important to ground it in. Okay, I'll do my clicks. So how many people here have heard of like quote unquote constitutional sheriffs? So some-ish. Okay, good. That's good. So it's not like totally unfamiliar. Do I point it at, I don't know where to point it. Oh, anyway, so why do we care? So sometimes they are called constitutional sheriffs because they argue that their only duty is to the Constitution, right? So just to be clear, that's what they call themselves. I sometimes call them far-right sheriffs. Some people might relate it to a branch of like far-right extremism. I don't really use that word. I don't really use the word extremism that much because I think, unfortunately, like this far-right kind of white supremacist movement is kind of becoming imbued in the GOP party nationally, so like it's hard for me to argue they're extreme. And I think, again, this is just sort of centering why it matters, right? That we know that already that law enforcement has a problem with far-right white supremacist groups. So, for example, Chicago PD just identified groups of officers who they know were involved in far-right groups, who had either tattoos or other markers, right? They were like admitted members, and they could not fire them, right? They said they were going to fire these particular officers, they couldn't. And I think this is something people might hear sometimes, right? That because it's hard to fire officers generally, it is also hard to fire officers for things that might be protected speech, right? A lot of what I have worked on is that this sort of history of sheriffs and racism, and then that sheriff's deputies kill more people, that should be than police, excuse me, and in custody deaths. So, you know, we talk to people whose loved ones were killed by police, and that's what happens outside where people can see. And one of the things about sheriffs that makes them sort of unique is that they also run the jail. So they run the correctional facility. And we know that jails are very dangerous. They hold people usually for shorter periods of time. They're where people go first, right? So if you pick someone up for drunk driving or what have you, the first place they're going to go is into the county jail. And we also know that these particular facilities are really dangerous. And again, it's sort of I call it kind of like it's a black box, or it's behind the wall, because people don't really get to see what happens, right? As the same way we do when we see officers on the street. And then, of course, there's the concern that on the federal level, police may be becoming more racist, not less. And I think this is sort of like a society, right? A society problem. This is the MAGA Trump issue, right? I mean, not that I don't think this is the room that I need to talk to, but like we already know that Trump's plan for police on a national level is to get rid of Department of Justice oversight, which is very important. It's to get rid of what remaining qualified immunity protections exist. So like we kind of, you know, not to put too much of a political plug, but those things are likely to happen if that's who becomes president on the federal level. The thing is not there. So a constitutional sheriff, so I say here that they believe sheriffs have the divine right to interpret the U.S. Constitution. It's kind of like a quasi, I hesitate to call it religious, but it has a sort of above and beyond just like the practicalities of your job. And this is from the CSPOA website, which is the biggest organization that supposed constitutional sheriffs can join, right? And they train. Anyway, in my book and in my reporting, I've spent a bit of time on how they sort of train sheriffs to believe in this particular philosophy. That could get to training. I put train in quotes because it's not real training, but in any event, their quote is, "The law enforcement powers held by the sheriff supersede those of any agent, officer, elected official, or employee from any level of government." So that's what they say. It's just not true. So you guys should know, it's just not true. Everybody, I was like, the police chief's here making me vaguely nervous, but you take an oath. Everybody takes an oath, right? Like anyone in public service, so like people who are elected to government, they take an oath. Anyone who does any kind of elected position or is in any form of public service take an oath. People who served in the military take an oath. This is like they're just claiming something that's just not true. So this is a little backstory. So I think that the most useful way to have this is just to know that this is where it came from, because some constitutional sheriffs will pretend like this is not true or they don't know. And I don't know that they know it or are doing it precisely, but the background of these far-right sheriffs comes from a movement that was called Posse Comitatus. It was like a big thing in the 70s and 80s. This is the sort of movement that got us people like Timothy McVeigh, the Oklahoma City bomber. This is, and the Aryan Nation, right? This sort of like, I think when most people think of like the Idaho Aryan Nation compound, right? This is kind of the roots. And this fellow, William Potter Gale, was, I mean, it's hard to describe him as anything other than he's just like an out-and-out anti-Semite. He's an out-and-out white supremacist. He identified himself as a minister of a Christian identity, which they call a church, but it's in essence sort of it's just a kind of neo-Nazi church, right? Like they argue that like white people are the chosen people, etc. And that's why he has a little priest collar, because he says he's a minister. And this is just some of the ideas that were prevalent in Posse Comitatus. Apologies, I'm just watching the time so people can ask questions. They had a lot of strange ideas. Some of them still exist today. So I have seen a revival of citizen juries, which is the idea that groups of people can like gather and arrest someone. A lot of importance on the sheriff, a lot of importance on this idea of natural rights, which is sort of similar backbone to something like the Oath Keepers or other militias. And then yes, a story about him in California. This movement, to be clear, was very violent. So like they also attacked, law enforcement did not like them, right, in the 70s and 80s. Like they were always trying to arrest these guys. They didn't like them. They sort of would appear in armed militias. Here's another. So this is another fellow who is very important to the constitutional sheriff movement. He is basically a Mormon anti-communist. I will happily send these slides to people, by the way. You could take pictures of them also, but I will send them to you in case you're worried that you'll miss one. He founded this institute called the National Center for Constitutional Studies. And if you guys have ever seen those little pocket constitutions, and they have George Washington on the front. So this is how you know. It's got George Washington with a quill on the front. And so George Washington didn't write the Constitution, right? Why is he on it? We don't know. Anyway, they're produced by this group. And these little pocket constitutions are really popular with like the Bundy family. They'll come up in like various sort of white supremacist groups. They'll pass them out. They're in like the Ammon Bundy's pocket. So that's where those come from. One time I gave a talk at a place and they had those constitutions and I didn't know. They didn't know either. They ordered them on Amazon. And I was like, oh, that's the bad constitution. I mean, it's just the Constitution, but anyway. People have to be careful. I'm going to skip over this a little because it's a little less important, but this is sort of the connection between some Mormon conspiracy theory style people and constitutional sheriffs. If you hear someone say something about the Constitution will hang by a thread, this is a Bundy comment. This is what they're talking about. Okay, so today, the biggest person affiliated with constitutional sheriffs is this guy, Richard Mack. He's in Arizona. He is good friends with your Clickitat County Sheriff, Bob Songer, if people are familiar with him. This is his, buddy. He is most infamous because, he ran for sheriff. He was sheriff twice. He was involved in an early gun rights case called Prince v. U.S. that he won. It was involving the Brady Bill. So it was decided in the 1990s, I think 1994. And from that, he kind of used his popularity to go on and form this coalition of sort of like-minded sheriffs, right? He still calls himself a sheriff, but he hasn't been a sheriff in a very long time. And this is the CSPOA. So again, Bob Songer is a member of the CSPOA. A few other Washington sheriffs, I think, are sort of part of this. And again, this is just the idea that Like the sheriff is more important than elected officials. It's sort of like very intensely focused on like localism with a huge bend towards, I would say that their politics just bend towards the far right, right? Like they don't support women's rights. They don't support the, rights of LGBTQ people. They don't support immigrants. It's kind of this like right-wing group. Anyway, and they will use this idea called interposition and nullification, which they have used to basically an argument to ignore federal or state authority. So that could be anything from like Supreme Court rulings to legislation to gun laws, right? Most people have probably heard this in Washington state is related to gun laws. So because the state has passed various protective gun measures, some sheriffs, particularly some rural sheriffs, have argued that they are entitled to sort of not enforce those laws in their county. This is also, they don't like lawyers either. So they say nobody likes lawyers very much in general, but their argument is like that they don't need lawyers to help them understand the law. An interesting position. I'm going to skip over this, but they have like other affiliated kind of far right groups. I'll do this quickly. Again, I'm trying to do quickly so we can get to some questions. I think that these things, the reason why I point out these 3 topics is just because they are big talking points right now for the national GOP, right? The idea of increased access to firearms, right? A sort of unfettered Second Amendment right? The sort of propagation of kind of the equivalent of armed militias, militia-type people. The concerns about election fraud, this sort of belief that like the 2020 election was stolen. And then finally this idea called the quote-unquote great replacement theory, which is rooted in this idea that immigrants, particularly black and brown immigrants, are going to somehow, they're going to take over the country and make it sort of become like the majority of people in the country. And that this is the idea, like this is a grand plan by liberals to sort of like overtake the government. All not true, but this is like anyway, these are themes that you will see as we sort of approach upon election season. And that's me. So to find me, there I am. I'll leave it there. The book will be out in the fall, but you guys feel free. I have a Substack where I post about sheriffs. I'm also on Twitter, and I am happy to give you guys my email if people want to contact me about anything. Do people have questions, or anything they want to ask? Oh.
We have time. Ooh, sorry about that. Wow. We have time for probably 1, maybe 2 questions. So, sir, we'll start with you.
I was trying to move fast.
You did great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm wondering how many constitutional sheriffs do you think that we have in the United States now? The really hard-over ones and maybe some edge cases? Are we talking dozens or hundreds or what?
Yeah, that's a good question. So so I qualify this by saying it's kind of hard to count because some of them are kind of like halfway. Like there's some that I would say, for example, Adam Fortney, the previous sheriff here, I would consider him kind of a halfway. Like he didn't fully embrace the ideas, but he was on the spectrum. So I often think of it as circles, like there's core believers, and then there's sort of a wider circle, and then there's sort of the propagation of the ideas generally. And what I do see a lot of is that the ideas generally have sort of drifted into the atmosphere. So for example, this happened in Washington state too, but in a few states where state legislatures have enacted gun laws, you'll have like dozens of sheriffs say they won't enforce them. And this is sort of a bit of like an overrepresentation problem because these are a lot of rural sheriffs. And so they don't represent a lot of people, but they represent a lot of counties. So it kind of sort of starts to make it look like there's like a mass of people when it's not, right? It's sort of undemocratic by its very nature because this is not a lot of people. And the state legislature is more democratic because, right, they're like elected representatives. So it's kind of hard to say. Max says he has like a third, which is a little over, there's 3,000. To me, that's too much. I would say and to be fair, his core group of believers is small. It's like 50. That's like his inner group. His wider group, though, is bigger. And that, to me, is almost more concerning because as the ideas get traction, it's like kind of like more acceptable to sort of say, like, oh, I don't want to enforce a gun law or something like that. Oh, thanks.
And any other questions?
I'll be here for a minute after if people want to ask me or talk to me.
Wonderful. Please join me in a round of applause for Jessica Pishko. Thank you so much. Oh, I got that. There we go. Thank you, thank you. So for our final speaker, please join me in welcoming Andrew Villeneuve. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. The Executive Director of the Northwest Progressive Institute. Yeah. So he conducted a tri-state poll in policing and will be sharing some important results. There we go. All right. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks so much. How's everybody doing? Good? Thank you for coming out on a sunny day to the Carl Gipson Center. Really appreciate it. This is a topic that deserves our continuing attention. We can't just sort of abandon the progress we've made and let the Republicans take us backwards. We know that would be irresponsible. In my organization, we're a nonprofit strategy center based in Redmond. We're a 501c4. And we like to say, if you're not on offense, you're on defense. Right? So we have to be working constantly to expand freedom, or right-wing Republicans are going to be busy contracting it. So that's why I'm really excited to share some research with you. Just to give you a little bit of background, if you've not heard of the Northwest Progressive Institute, we started in 2003. We were formed as a strategy center, and our purpose is to help people find the path to victory for the causes they care about. And we're called the Northwest Progressive Institute because we work to make progress across all issues, not just one issue. So we plug into any issue that needs resources, attention, bandwidth, etc. An example of that would be this past year, we worked with our allies at Unchained at Last and other organizations to end child marriage in Washington State. How many of you knew that child marriage was allowed? Yeah, some of you did. Well, it's gone now. As of June 6th, young girls can no longer be married off by their parents into abusive relationships from which there's practically no escape. And that was actually something that, my organization, my team, when we learned about it, we're like, how's that even a thing still? I mean, a lot of people, I think, don't know that it was a thing. But so we came in when this bill was sailing through the House of Representatives, and then it hit a legislative logjam in the Senate. And we were able to use our influence to get that bill unstuck. We have on our sibling organization board, we have Senator Monka Dinger, who you heard from earlier. She and I have a long-standing friendship and relationship, so I made some calls and we got that bill heard right away in the Senate in the 2024 session, and it landed on the governor's desk and it was signed into law. Only one legislator in the entire legislature voted against it, Jeff Holy, a Republican from Eastern Washington. But otherwise, everybody supported it. So there are some things that are still bipartisan, and actually police reform is one of those things. So as I mentioned, we do a lot of research. Let's take a look at some of that research from our most recent poll. And one of the things I want to explain is that, so we do tons of polling, we do different kinds of polling. The polling you're about to see is from a tri-state poll. So that means we surveyed voters in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And the reason we did that is because we wanted to take this broad regional look at the issue. We especially wanted to know if there were divergences when it comes to Idaho. Like, do people feel really differently over there than they do in Oregon and Washington? As we're about to see, though, there aren't as many divergences on the topic of police reform. There's some really encouraging findings that we're going to go over. But first, let's talk about the sample and how we conducted the poll, because methodology is very important to those of us in the public opinion research space. And if you're interested, I don't have time for it right now, but if you ever want to know like how to evaluate the credibility of a poll, I'm happy to talk to you about that so that you can figure out what makes sense and what is a bunch of nonsense. Because there is a bunch of garbage out there, unfortunately. Not all polls are created equal. Some are really good, some are terrible. There was polling last cycle that found Tiffany Smiley winning Washington State or competitive with Patty Murray. She wasn't. So you have to know how to distinguish the bad stuff from the good stuff. And I'm happy to talk with anyone in this room about that whenever you'd like. So this poll consisted of about 1,012 likely voters in the 3-state area, and they were interviewed in April over a period of 2 days or 3 days. The survey was conducted online entirely. This was done by Civics. They're a national polling company. They do very good work. Among other things, they nailed the Smiley-Murray outcome. So they basically anticipated that Murray was going to win by the margin that she did, which is impressive because in polling you don't necessarily expect the margin to align. But they had the closest polling to the actual result. And so that's one of the reasons we selected them to do this particular survey. So the margin of error is plus or minus 3.4%, and I don't have time for like a 20-minute discourse on what margin of error is, but that's basically a part of polling methodology, and the confidence interval is 95%. And then we had some of our samples from Washington, some from Oregon, some from Idaho. Most are from Washington because we have the bulk of the tri-state population. Let's go into our first finding. So this is one that Juan and I are pretty excited about, and this is all about keeping racists out of our police department. So we asked people, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? People who hold white supremacist views or white Christian nationalist views should be barred from serving in police departments in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. 64% in the tri-state area agree with that, and over a majority strongly agree. This is a very encouraging finding because you have to remember that there's a significant percentage of our electorate here in the Pacific Northwest who are ultra-MAGA, okay? They're very right-wing. You're not going to get them to agree to almost anything that anybody else believes in. Democrats, independents, reasonable Republicans, these ultra-MAGA folks are really far gone. And so it's very hard to get them to agree to anything. They sometimes will voice support for something that's super sensible, but that's kind of like a blue moon occasion. So 64% is a really good number. Remember, that includes Idaho. Okay, this is Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. And Idaho is a minority of the group because they're not the biggest of the states population-wise, but still they're in there. So 64% is a really good number. 53% strongly agree. Only 30% disagree. In our polling, we often see something in the 30s in the opposition percentages. So, Republicans can often get like 36% of the vote in Washington State. We'll see them between 35 and 37% in our polls. That's kind of their floor. So don't be surprised when you see that number, 30%, 35%, et cetera. That's very common. But this is a really good finding. It shows that at least Democrats and independents and even a few Republicans are united behind some of these ideas that we should have an inclusive, pluralistic society. So this is our first finding. Now let's talk about de-escalation techniques. So our next question to share with you today is all about more effective de-escalation techniques. We asked people if they agree or disagree. These should be implemented by law enforcement in our region to reduce police shootings. 68% agree, okay? 46% strongly, 22% somewhat. This is another finding where you have a very strong separation between those who agree and those who disagree. I mean, the ratio is over 2 to 1. So that's really encouraging. What I look for is to see whether the strong bucket is bigger than the total opposition bucket. Anytime I see that, I'm very encouraged. And we do have that here. And you can see most people have an opinion on this as well. There's very few who are saying they're not sure. So we can feel very good about this finding too. People still want, 4 years after the social justice protests of the spring and summer of 2020, people are still invested in de-escalation. It hasn't changed. right? What maybe has changed is the priorities of people in Congress or in some of our state legislatures and so on, but the people's priorities are still very much in favor of de-escalation and changing police culture. And that's proven by this data here. Now let's talk about independent prosecutions. This is one of my favorite findings. So we asked, do you support or oppose creating an independent prosecutions unit in your state's Office of the Attorney General to review police use of deadly force investigations, file criminal charges if warranted, and potentially prosecute violations? And notice we've got 61%, right? That is a supermajority. That's 3/5. That's really good. This is an idea that Republicans are not going to support, I mean, across the board. So to have 3/5 support is really encouraging. Now you'll notice the strongly support is not as big. It's 38%, but that's still a significant chunk there of the electorate. And the somewhat support category is 23%. So we should feel good that we've got that much support, given that Republicans really don't like this idea at all. And the opposition there, only 28%. That's not too big. So that's also encouraging. Now let's talk about the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So the question, do you support or oppose creating a new federal law to hold law enforcement accountable for misconduct in court, require police departments to report inappropriate use of force and racial profiling incidents to a national registry, and reform police training and policies to make civilian law enforcement interactions safer? 2/3 support this. 2/3. And that's really strong. And you'll notice the opposition, again, pretty muted. It's not that big. And there are only a small number of people who are not sure. We actually just asked this question in Washington's 3rd Congressional District as well. And what was really interesting is that in WA 03, the numbers were very similar. So this is a district where Marie Glueson-Camp-Perez is running against Joe Kent. And if you're not familiar with that race, you should be following it closely. But it's really interesting that voters there are super enthusiastic about that bill. And so definitely that bill needs to come back in the next Congress. It's very important. It needs to pass, and we need to get rid of the Senate filibuster so we can get through the Senate. All right, and then this might be my favorite question of all, because it's going to shock some people for sure, because a lot of people are going to be like, well, that's not possible. But this is what our finding found. This is a long question, but we had to write a long question to explain what we were asking people about. This is about ending or reforming at least qualified immunity. If it's to be ended, we're probably going to have to start with reforming it first. But the question was, a legal doctrine called qualified immunity currently protects police officers from being held personally liable for conduct if their actions do not violate a clearly established law. Proponents of qualified immunity say police officers need to be shielded from lawsuits so they can do their jobs without having to worry they'll be sued over every mistake or lapse in bad judgment. Opponents say that qualified immunity has become a get-out-of-jail-free card for rogue police officers, making it nearly impossible to sue them individually, even in cases where they have obviously used excessive force or blatantly violated people's civil rights. Do you support or oppose passing a federal law to reform the qualified immunity doctrine and subject police officers to greater accountability? And you can see over 60% do support that. So this is important because the way you ask about it, it's really going to influence the answer. We needed to write a neutral question, but we also needed to be fair to the reform movement, because I've seen a lot of questions that aren't fair to the reform movement. So that's why we described it in sort of very plain terms that people can understand. This idea of a get-out-of-jail-free card for rogue police officers. People can understand that logic. They understand what that means. Okay, they're getting let off the hook. That's what you have to convey to people. Otherwise, you might not actually find out what they really think. It's not like we didn't give the other side their due in the question, is it? They got their due. We were balanced in this question. We said, here's what proponents say, here's what opponents say. Now, what do you think? And we can clearly see there's a divide here. 64% support reform, 29% are opposed, 8% are not sure. That is a very, very strong finding for something that I think we're going to have a lot of pushback from elected officials for years to come. This is going to be hard to get done. But the fact that we already have this support out of the gate, it should really tell us something about how hungry people are for a change in our police reform and culture. This is what we need to be focusing on. The state can work on this too. It's not just the federal level. So knowing that people in the tri-state area support this, that's something that really I'm happy to see. So those are our findings, and I'd be happy to take any questions if folks have some. Anybody got a question? How long did what take? So the question was, how long did it take? So the putting the survey together took a few weeks, months maybe, and then the fielding took 3 days, and then the analysis took several weeks to really go through everything and understand the data. But the fielding itself is kind of the shortest part. It's the preparation and the analysis after that take the longest. Yes, well, Idaho has some folks who are online. I mean, there's the good news is people could take this on their mobiles, so they weren't just confined to like their DSL connections. Trust me, we also do polls with landlines. We have hybrid methodologies, so we do different types of surveys. We don't just do entirely online. There's kind of 3 different types of surveys we do. One is 100% online and done through recruiting people from social media and through text. Another is the panel approach, which this was, and then we also do hybrid polls with landlines and text to web. So we've got data that corroborates this panel data. And so for example, our poll in the 3rd district, 47% of the people who took that poll took it on a landline. So we can see the data has been corroborated through our other polling, which makes us confident that the sample is representative and that we did a good job following the scientific method. Anybody else? Yes? Yeah, we do. This data is public, and I will send out the link to everyone that I have the contact information for, and I'm sure Juan will be circulating the link as well so that you can get the data and read it on your own time if you're interested. But we do have it in Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. Yeah, when we first started polling, we were only calling landlines because our pollster does the fielding. We don't do that. We hire the pollster, they do the fielding. But we were calling landlines only for years, and then we started shifting into text. You had to, otherwise your samples would be unrepresentative. So we can feel good, given Civic's track record and our track record of accuracy, we can feel good that the data is solid and that it comes from a representative sample.
Have another, that mic. We run into the back.
Let's see if I can remember it now that I have the mic. Considering, here we are. I've forgotten it. Jeez. Never mind.
That's okay, maybe you'll remember. And Andrew, while I'm waiting for others to maybe have questions, I'm gonna move over here, maybe that helps. Oh, you got it.
Okay, so polling, and I have gotten plenty of text messages, hey, take this poll, and I'm like, why would I even want to? Do you have a recommendation on how to know if we really should answer the question that is being proposed on our cellular devices?
I would always take the polls. Because you can screenshot them and then share them with people like myself who are in the public opinion research space, and then we can evaluate them and find out who's doing it. Sometimes we can actually tell. Sometimes it's really hard. My team's goal when we're doing a poll, we don't want people to really be able to guess who is doing it. And that's because our questions are all neutral. So from the poll taker's point of view, they can't tell the motivation of the sponsor because we're not asking loaded questions. Instead, if we ask a question that might look like it's for one candidate or another candidate, we balance it out with something that is the opposite. So the poll taker can't really know what our motivation is. If we've done our job right, it's going to be hard to guess. Okay, I don't know if it's a progressive or a conservative poll. I can't tell. That's what we want them to think. But not everyone does that. So it's very obvious. Some of these Republican polls, it's so obvious that it's a Republican poll. Just the way they're asking the questions, it's like you did a bad job. You know, your questions are loaded, they're prejudicial. Obviously, you're trying to get a particular number. So that's where, you know, screenshotting and sharing with people who are in the polling space, like we love that. We love that intelligence. I've got like 4 friends who regularly send me screenshots of polls, and I just love that because it lets us know what's going on in the space. So yes, take the survey, take screenshots of each modal if you can. That might get a bit tiresome and repetitive if it's a long survey, but at least, you know, doing some of it. And you know, some of the polls are being done in accordance with the scientific method. So then you're helping with research. You're helping a good thing. Not every poll is good, not every poll is bad, as I said. So since you can't necessarily know whether a poll is good or bad when you start taking it, you know, just assume that it might be good. And then as you go along, if you really hate it and you know it's garbage and you get tired of taking it, you can always abandon it. And you know, then the survey company won't really be able to use the results if you've abandoned most of it. So it's more fun to take the screenshots and kind of mess with especially the bad ones. The good ones, you know, you want to help them out so that they can get their project done. We have a poll running right now, actually, and I'm hoping that people take the poll so that we can get some good data back. It's only Pierce County. So, and in any case, we can't give you the link because that would violate the scientific method. The pollster has to recruit a representative sample of people to participate, and if you're not somebody who fits, you know, the mold, like maybe they already have a certain number of people who are in a particular age bracket have already taken the survey, then they don't need any more from that age bracket. So they can't include anyone they haven't recruited. Otherwise, it's like a Como viewer poll or something where, you know, people just vote as many times as they like, and you know, they say whatever they want, and it's not necessarily representative. Yeah, polling is a very interesting topic. Anybody else have a question? All right. Well, I guess we're ready for closing remarks.
Yeah, let's give a nice big round of applause for Andrew. All about polling. So to close out our summit, I'm going to invite Juan Perales, president of Unidos, back to the stage to talk about next steps and how we can continue building this change in police culture. Thank you, Juan.
Let's give Angela a big round of applause. She's done a terrific job today. Before I do my closing remarks, I can't even speak. Before I do my closing remarks, I just want to thank everybody that put this summit together and the people that were in the kitchen serving our food. I think it's a lot of work putting this summit together. It took me 5 months to put this together. I started back in January. And getting the speakers, you know, to participate was the biggest challenge. But in the end, they all participated. I want to also say that Manka Dhingra was speaking here today. I also invited Nick Brown, the other candidate for Attorney General. But when I spoke to him in January, he said he would come, but 2 or 3 months went by to get all the other speakers confirmed. So by the time I got back to him, he said, well, I can't participate. I got a conflict now because, you know, it's been 2 months. So I said, no, I understand. So no worries. So anyway, I'm going to start out by saying that the Declaration of Independence began with those self-evident truths of universal equality, of the human rights that define our common heritage, that are the source of the dignity of our legitimate consent to be governed by a system of power that is our own creation. Jefferson also wrote, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind required that we should declare the causes which impel us to act. We heard today of the causes of failure of the rule of law, its institutions created to establish justice and secure the blessings of liberty for us all and our posterity. Police culture defines how an organization is perceived both internally and externally. In today's policing environment, leaders must be intentional in creating adaptive cultures that respond to the needs of their own team and the community. We must ask ourselves the following question. Why is it in the world's greatest democracy, so many people of color are oppressed by the criminal justice system? Why is it so many marginalized people must fear the police? Why are the articulate and intelligent voices of police reform so frequently muted by the rhetoric of police systems and culture? A problem we have with law enforcement is white supremacy, okay? It wasn't talked about much today, but some did. The thing is that we can start addressing white supremacy by addressing the racially biased policing, by addressing the white supremacy element within law enforcement. I believe that this is the element in law enforcement that has made it difficult to recruit people into law enforcement, especially when law enforcement is being targeted by snipers like we saw in Dallas, Texas, and most recently in Charlotte, North Carolina, where 4 police officers were fatally shot. It is considered one of the deadliest assaults on U.S. law enforcement. It is this element in policing that through misconduct and brutality that results in consent decrees issued by the Department of Justice, and this costs taxpayers money. Seattle's consent decree has cost the department $200 million, and that's just since 2012. 12 years have gone by, and it's still not all resolved. So I think that the use of deadly force, the use of force in crowd management, accountability, and some collective bargaining issues still need to be monitored 12 years later. Police culture will not change unless the ongoing dialogue between community advocates for police accountability, law enforcement, and legislators acknowledge and embrace the need to change culture focused on saving lives as a priority. Change in police culture must focus in transparency, accountability, training for police on evidence-based skills that will allow them to cultivate their humanity over the course of their careers and bolster their capacity for sense-making under stress. It will open up their minds to their own bias and judgments against others and ground the culture in compassion. Finally, the transformation of police culture must be embraced, and it must be grounded in emotional intelligence, effective communication practices, adaptability, humanism, building trust, and creating a healthy police agency supported internally and externally. Finally, Unidos will send out a Zoom invite to everyone present today to start the dialogue on legislation that has tri-state support. The invite will also be extended to all the members of the House Community Safety, Justice, and Reentry Committee and the Senate's Law and Justice Committee. Together, we can create legislation, policy changes that will build much-needed trust between police and BIPOC communities. We can no longer be tough on crime. We must be serious on crime. Let us engage and begin to work to create safe communities for everyone, regardless of class or color. We must all acknowledge that personal safety is a human right. Thank you very much for being here today, and I hope that we will continue this dialogue. Thank you. It's not as hot as it was earlier, so I was drenching in perspiration. It's cooled down a little bit. Thank you.